Genuflect by Tracy Twyman. Note: while several of the characters in this story have certain aspects based on known, powerful figures in the modern world, I make no claim that these people are involved in any nefarious deeds such as those depicted here, nor is it my intention to malign them. These characteristics were borrowed for artistic purposes only. Should the whole frame of nature round him break, in ruin and confusion hurled, he, unconcerned, would hear the mighty crack, and stand secure amidst a falling world. Horace, Odes. Chapter 1. Autodidact de Occultis. To know the secret or the formula of God is to be God. To know the secret or the formula of the devil is to be the devil. To wish to be at the same time God and devil is to absorb in oneself the most absolute antinomy, the two most strained contrary forces. It is the wish to shut up in oneself an infinite antagonism. It is to drink a poison which would extinguish the suns and consume the worlds. Eliphas Levi, The Key to the Mysteries. Hello there. Thank you for reading this book. I hope it will be of interest to you. This is intended to be a record of the incredible things I experienced at the end of March and beginning of April 2018, leading to the historic events of this year that you no doubt already know about. I need to write this down before my memory fades completely. This is already starting to happen, so I must work quickly. I got myself into this mess because I am good at what I do, but there is also very little market for what I do, so I have to take what I can get whenever it comes around. My job is the sort of thing that only exists in horror movies. I investigate the occult. I study the anthropology of religions and cults, both old and new, from around the world. Then I apply the patterns I see there to the study of other things, and I always get interesting results. Most of my work just involves reading books and websites, lots of rare books and extremely obscure documents. Many rare, out-of-print texts can be found online for free if you know where to look. Google Books, JSTOR, Bartleby, and Scribd are good resources for this sort of thing. Also, the interlibrary loan program is amazing. I can't believe that a library halfway around the world will loan me, a complete stranger, a book with only 3 copies known to exist. Again, usually for free. Only a fraction of my research material involves books about secret societies or magic spells. A lot of it includes chasing down details about historical events and personages, or comparing the motifs used in myths, folklore, and fairy tales. But I don't pretend to be an academic per se. No university would fund my work, because none of it can be used to advance the political movements embraced by present-day college culture, or to prop up the pet theories of tenured professors. In pursuit of the esoteric, I have at times accidentally revived doctrines and theses that have been long abandoned by modern mainstream academia, often with no good reason for the rejection. My work tends to validate the worldviews of writers from previous eras whose entire approach to scholarship and the assumptions it was based on have been thrown out by today's universities, along with the bathwater. I find that quite often these modern exemplars of learning end up just quoting other modern authors, who of course share their own biases about historical events and people, without checking the primary documents related to the subject in question. This becomes an endless loop of reflection, as if in a hall of mirrors, until the author of a research paper ends up essentially quoting himself by quoting 7 other writers he knows who are working within the same small milieu and whose ideas can be traced directly back to him. They are so busy patting each other on the back that nobody takes the time to track the evolution of the belief system that is being constructed between them, which may one day be taught to public school children like a catechism. If they were to do this, they would quite often find themselves having to reevaluate the work of classical writers that has been dismissed heretofore, because the underlying approach to research used to construct it is no longer considered politically correct. Strangely, what seems to be the hallmark of this older approach to history, anthropology, and comparative mythology is simply the assumption that one can find significance in the similarities between divergent traditions from different cultures. Also, it is apparently now controversial to suggest that symbolism is always symbolic of some kind of prototype with inherent meaning. Today's academics revel in depriving man's ancestral traditions of meaning because they can project whatever they want onto it. While undergrads majoring in diversity studies protest cultural appropriation on the other side of the campus, myth and anthropology students are bullied into ignoring how the religious beliefs and ritual practices of one group have influenced another. So I knew that my bills would never be paid by a government grant or university donors. I have to compete in the marketplace with all the other nonfiction writers for a reader who, for whatever reason, are interested in this type of subject matter. Of course, those people are usually weirdos. In seeking further information beyond book learning, I have, at times in the past, actually socialized with some of these weirdos. In other words, I've joined cults and secret societies that I've been invited into, mainly to see how they work. I had also practiced several forms of divination, both in these groups and on my own. I found this to be a useful way to find clues pertaining to the rest of my research. All of that became too dangerous for me at a certain point, however. So for the last few years, until about 2 months ago, I had socialized with almost nobody. I abstained from both ceremonial magic and reading oracles. I contented myself with utilizing the knowledge I had amassed, the published information already available, and my own intuition. By now, I had developed a knack for understanding how mystical traditions worked, and could often anticipate what I would find in my investigations. This operated as a sort of sixth sense. I may have put the Ouija board away, but it was as if my mind was a divination tool of its own. It was like there was a radio receiver in my brain that I could never switch off. But I could usually tune it to specific wavelengths to pick up on information about whatever it was I was interested in learning about at the time. For the most part, this has been independent research, and I have published my findings in print-on-demand books that I produce myself. I have also done radio interviews to promote the books and, when lucky, paid speeches, usually to small crowds. I've made a little niche for myself as the world's foremost expert on several very specific topics that I have pioneered on my own. But the living has never been easy. When the March hare began to herald the approach of spring and everyone seemed to be rejoicing, I alone, it seemed, was downcast. I faced a slew of problems that could be solved only with money. I could barely even use my own phone because of the non-stop calls from bill collectors. In particular, Barclays Bank called at least 3 times a day to discuss the licensing fees I owed to the British Museum. This was in regards to the photos of the Métis coffer, as I call it, that I had printed in my most recent book, The Baphomet Papers. It had been hailed as a masterpiece by fellow occult researchers, but ignored by the general public due to its size and the obscurity of its subject matter. Therefore, these fees from the museum would cost me more than I had made on the project so far, and I could not afford to pay them. Chapter 2. Opportunity Knocks. The fish thinks about its hunger, not about the fisherman. It is the master who seeks the disciple. Alejandro Jodorowsky, The Holy Mountain. Therefore, I was very glad when Leopold Black, Baron of Elphinstone in England and a peer in the House of Lords, contacted me through my website on Tuesday, March 20th, the spring equinox, saying he wanted to hire me to do a private lecture. He wished for me to give a talk about the Métis coffer. This is an item that had been forgotten in the back catalogue of the British Museum, until I identified it as one of the alleged Templar artifacts, written about a century earlier by Orientalist Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall. When I wrote back to the Baron and asked whom the lecture would be for, he said he belonged to a group called the Worshipful Society of Butchers, and that they met at the Oriental Club in London once monthly, usually around the full moon. He sent me a link to his personal page on the Houses of Parliament's website. I then used Google and found the Butcher Society's Wikipedia entry. Apparently, it was one of the few livery companies in the City of London that was still dedicated to its original trade, butchery. Most of the others had evolved into mere fraternal organizations with rituals and regalia, meeting for dinner and raising money for charities several times a year. The Society's motto pertained directly to this practical matter. Omnia subiacisti, sub pedibus, oves et boves. This is a Latin quote from Psalm chapter 8, verses 6 to 7. Thou hast put all things under man's feet, all sheep and oxen. Their company arms featured 3 winged bulls and 2 severed bullheads, along with 2 axes. The group's concerns seemed primarily about beef production. It was unclear to me why a trade organization such as this would be interested in hearing from me about esoteric archaeology. I also didn't understand why they needed to meet at the Oriental Club, when from what I could tell it seemed that they had their own property, Butcher's Hall, 20 minutes away in a different part of town. Nonetheless, I acquiesced to a video Skype conversation with the Baron. I found him taking tea in a poshly decorated room, sitting in a brown wooden armchair lined with black leather, with his feet upon a matching ottoman. He was wearing a navy blue dinner jacket and trousers with a white shirt, and an azure-colored velvet robe and light brown leather cap-toe Oxford shoes. He seemed rather at home there, so I asked if this was his house. He shook his head sideways and said he was at the clubhouse. Nice, I thought. At least the club has money. An unseen hand was holding up the camera. A smartphone, I presumed. He said it was his nephew, also a member of the club. He promised a payment of $10,000 if did the lecture, $3,000 of it up front. He also demanded secrecy, which I thought was a bit odd. But hey, $10,000 is more than I'd made in the last 6 months combined. I couldn't justify turning it down, so I agreed. Over the next few days, as I tried to prepare my lecture, my sense of foreboding grew strong. But the Baron promptly purchased my plane tickets and hotel for the week in question, at a cost in excess of $7,000. This was, in my mind, legal consideration for the verbal contract, and assured me that these people were serious, not just wasting my time. The reviews for the Regent Palace Hotel at Piccadilly Circus were a bit meh, but I felt I had no right to be a snob and demand better. Still, walking into a room full of British aristocrats to deliver a message about a Satanic Templar artifact is very intimidating, especially to a group of people calling themselves worshipful butchers. I wondered if they would accept my theory. The illustrations on the sides and lid of the coffer I proposed indicated that the Knights Templar, the Pope's own specially chartered warriors of Christ throughout the medieval Crusades, were having ritual sex with boys and sacrificing them in an attempt to destroy the created universe. The first part of this claim, the ritual murder and gay pedophilia, is just what the Templars had already been convicted of and burnt at the stake for by the King of France in the early 14th century. These rites were allegedly all part of their secret worship of a demonic entity named Baphomet, which my book was named after. The last part, about destroying the universe, was my own unique contribution. Two obvious objections to the very idea spring up immediately when you consider it. First, why would anyone want to destroy the universe? Maybe a miserable and depressed person would desire that, but why a whole organization of men from wealthy families involved in an incredibly successful material enterprise, as the Templars were? Secondly, how could any ritual done by men destroy everything that exists? Many people today think it's possible that the behavior of mankind as a species could destroy life on Earth as we know it. But the destruction of the universe as a whole seems like a bit much, doesn't it? Granted, the Templars lived in a world where the universe was thought to be much smaller and of a different arrangement than what is generally accepted today. Still, it seems quite an ambitious nihilistic anti-goal. Certainly, it is not immediately obvious how pederasty and human sacrifice would bring that about, even in the most twisted occult logic. But the most twisted occult logic is not immediately obvious, by definition, as I was soon reminded. Chapter 3. Plane Problems. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 9. My first plane departed from PDX in Portland, Oregon, on the afternoon of Tuesday, March 27th. It immediately occurred to me as soon as I squeezed my body into the seat that I was going to die of deep vein thrombosis long before reaching my destination the next day. I could not fathom how I was going to stay in that unpleasant position for the better part of 12 hours, with just one layover in Houston. As if to punish me for my weak thoughts, the situation escalated from bad to worse. When we got to Houston, we found that there was a storm over the area, and the plane couldn't land until it passed. We circled in the air for a couple of hours, waiting for that to happen. Then the captain announced over the PA system that we would be diverted to a military base in Austin. There we would refuel and wait for things to clear up in Houston. All this time I had waited without using the restroom on board, not wanting to force the people next to me to stand up so I could squeeze past. This proved to be an awful decision. By the time I realized how badly I needed the toilet, there were 10 people standing in line, as I could see when I stood up from my window seat to look. I decided to use the skills that had gotten me through grade school where we were only allowed to use the bathroom during lunch. I sat down and tried my best at transcendental meditation, hoping to take my mind off my bursting bladder. But whenever I try to concentrate on anything in public, someone in the vicinity feels compelled to interrupt. This time was no different. "I'm dying for a cigarette," said the man next to me in a thick Arab accent. With that, Harut al-Hazrat dragged me into a conversation. He was a peculiar young man with long, unkempt hair forming Polish plait, dressed in black trousers with a black shirt and trench coat. His English was good, but he mumbled. I had to lean in close to hear him, which was an annoying strain. But the talk took my mind off my discomfort somewhat, and that helped pass the time. When he found out I was going to England ultimately, he told me that his first name was the Arabic equivalent of Arthur. Specifically, he claimed that the king of Camelot's name was, quote, derived from Harut, and that this figure of Western mythology was based on a character from pre-Islamic Mesopotamia. I smirked at this. I told him what kinds of books I wrote. This prompted him to talk about his years of study under a Sufi murshid in Washington, D.C. Then he bragged that he could use prayer to summon UFOs, to which I said, of course, "You should summon a flying saucer to pick us up and take us to Houston." I laughed at myself. He didn't. "Actually, storms help bring the UFOs," he said. "They open up holes in the sky, which are portals for the saucers. They also use the extra electricity in the air to fly and to make light." "Oh," I said, shaking my head vigorously in the affirmative. The old white lady next to him glared at us in disapproval. I don't think it was just that our conversation came off as stupid. I felt that maybe she didn't like Arabs and thought that I was flirting with him, which perhaps she didn't think young white women should be doing. Maybe I was reading too much into her icy stare, but I am usually right about these things. The plane sat on the tarmac for another 3 hours. During that time, the toilet began to overflow, and the contents actually started to roll down the aisle. While the flight attendants attempted to deal with that, inadequately, an Asian woman 2 rows ahead of me stood up, crying hysterically, and shouted that her grandmother had passed out next to her. Paramedics soon boarded the plane and took her away. A party of 4 native Texans then demanded to be let off the aircraft also, stating that they could drive to Houston before the plane would ever get there. Eventually, though, the plane did return to Houston airspace and successfully landed. By that time, my conversation with Harut had died down, as we were both choking on the stench of the overflowed toilet and trying not to piss in our pants. I said goodbye to him as we exited the plane. Then, after using the bathroom as quickly as possible, I hurried over to the first United Airlines booth I found that had an employee present. The airport was ominously empty except for my fellow displaced passengers, who were scattered around frantically trying to find someone to reschedule the connecting flights they had missed. When I got to the United Airlines booth, attended by a middle-aged black woman, I found there was no need to hurry. There were no more flights to England departing that night. Instead, I would take a shuttle to the local Marriott, where they had arranged a room for me, and wait for a flight the following morning. I then asked where I could find my luggage. The woman informed me that my suitcase was on its way to another destination somewhere else in the United States. "You'll have to catch up with it some other time," she said flippantly, as though it didn't matter when or where I eventually found my suitcase. I couldn't believe it. "You mean I have to do this lecture in England without even a change of clothes?" I whined, to utterly deaf, indifferent ears. "I don't even have my makeup or shampoo because I'm not allowed to take it in my carry-on." She started at me blankly, waiting for my tantrum to end, waiting for me to realize I wasn't special, and that my problems didn't matter to her at all. When I looked down, I noticed that she was handing me a small black nylon bag with a zipper and the United Airlines logo on it. Inside was a collection of travel-sized toiletries. I took the bag and my laptop case, the only possessions I had with me anymore, and slinked away dejectedly, muttering, "Thank you," with total insincerity. As I walked over to the departure zone to meet my shuttle, I passed a statue of George W. Bush, for whom Houston's airport is named. I took it as an omen that my mission would fail. Chapter 4. Answers Lacking. If any part of your uncertainty is a struggle between your heart and your mind, follow your mind. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. At the hotel, I had tried calling Leopold with a long-distance calling card, using the phone number he had given me. It rang and rang with that odd, nervous ring they use in the British telephone system, but nobody picked up. There was no voicemail or anything. I had never called the number before, as I had no reason to. All of our correspondence had been through email, except for that one Skype conversation. I checked the number in my email archives twice using my laptop and the hotel's Wi-Fi. I was certain I was dialing correctly. I even used Google to make sure I was punching the city and country codes right. I was. I slept for a few hours and then tried again at dawn, which was 11 a.m. in England, but there was still no answer, so I had no choice but to give up on that. I logged into my email again and was surprised to find nothing from him there either. I wrote him a message telling him what had happened and asked him to make sure my greeting party was aware of my new arrival time. I then hurried down to have breakfast in cafe at the hotel lobby, as I had not found anything to eat since the previous morning. While I ate my raisin bran, I used my laptop to check the news. A toolbar at the top of my browser that points out significant anniversaries for each date reminded me that it was Spy Wednesday, a name for the Wednesday before Easter. Finding this interesting, I clicked on the link provided, which led to a Wikipedia article. As I suspected, the definition of the word spy being used in this instance is the verb form, meaning, quote, to ambush or ensnare, because this is the day on which, they say, Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus. The Catholics observe this day with the Tenebrae Darkness liturgy, in which they gradually extinguish all the candles on the altar. When the last one is out and the church is completely dark, the Strepitus is performed. This is a loud, crashing sound, often made by the priest abruptly shutting a large Bible that is made to mimic the earthquake traditionally said to have occurred at the moment of Christ's death. Tenebrae was originally written to be performed on Good Friday, the anniversary of that death, and is still in some places, while in others it is performed the day before, on Maundy Thursday. This reminded me of an image I'd seen in Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall's 1818 treatise Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum, which I had translated from the Latin and published last year along with my own Baphomet book. It was from a ceremonial stone bowl, one of the many Templar artifacts he'd discovered in churches in Europe located on their former properties. It showed a naked woman kneeling on the ground between two images of a figure identified on several of the artifacts as mate, a hermaphrodite entity. The woman was pouring water out of a vase onto the candles of a candelabrum called a seven-branch, what the Jews call a menorah. According to Church Fathers Clement and Philo, both of Alexandria, the flames on the seven-branch represent the seven classical planets recognized in antiquity. The symbolism of this ceremony seems a bit like what Muhammad did by reducing the number of idols in the Islamic Kaaba from 360 to just one, a stone representing the monotheistic God. In the Tenebrae, all but one of the heavenly lights, once worshipped by pagan man, were put out except for one, representing the sun, with the sun rebaptized as Jesus Christ. Hammer-Purgstall thought that the Templars were secret devotees of Ophite Gnosticism, a Greco-Roman mystery cult that viewed creation as a prison controlled by the power of illusion. The goal of their rituals was to dethrone the archons above so that they could break out of the jail. The archons were the rulers of fate, seen as being identical with the visible planets of the ancients, among which the sun and the moon were included at the time, the others being Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each archon was viewed to rule one of the heavens, defined by what we now call its orbit. These seven heavens were thought to be stacked above the earthly realm, as though in a layer cake, each another layer of confinement, keeping our souls locked away from the source of pure spirit, accessible somewhere beyond the sphere of Saturn. Jehovah, the God of the Bible, was thought by Gnostics to merely be one of these archons, identifiable with Jupiter, aka Jove, whom the Greeks called Zeus. His mother, the Gnostic wisdom goddess Sophia Achamoth, was added to the seven to form the Ogdoad, the eight. Hammer-Purgstall thought that Sophia Achamoth was worshipped by the Knights Templar in the form of Baphomet, or Mete. This latter name, he thought, could be traced back to the Greek figure of Metis, the first bride of Zeus. She played a very important role initiating and upholding his rule as king of the gods. Like Sophia, her name translated directly to wisdom, specifically cunning, prudence, and wise counsel. To understand what happened to her, we have to go all the way back to the Genesis story of Greek mythology. Zeus was the son of Kronos, who had to castrate his father Uranos in order to escape the womb of his mother, Gaia. Ouranos had deliberately prevented his children from being born, cognizant that one of them was fated to overthrow him as the king of the gods. When Kronos later engendered his own children with his wife Rhea, he became aware of a similar fate that was to come from one of these progeny, so he devised his own way of dealing with it by swallowing them upon birth. But just as Gaia had schemed against her husband to aid her son Kronos in fulfilling his destiny, by supplying his with the castration knife, Rhea came up with a plan to save her son Zeus from ending up in his father's stomach. In this case, she substituted the baby with a decoy in the form of a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. Later, they say, Zeus found a way to poison his father, causing him to vomit up all the other children that had already been swallowed. Zeus and his siblings then fought their way to supremacy, overthrowing Kronos. The clever witch who conceived the poison plot was the goddess Metis, Hammer Purgstall's mate, whom Zeus subsequently married. As the story goes, Zeus, just like his predecessors, gained knowledge of a prophecy that if he bred with Metis, one of the children would overthrow him. Having already consummated the wedding and impregnated her, his solution was to swallow the mother before the birth even happened. He was able to do this, some say, by tricking her into turning herself into a fly, so that she was small enough to go inside his mouth. However, other depictions of the act show him eating her limb by limb at full size. Whichever way it happened, as with the Olympian gods in the gullet of Kronos, Metis was immortal, so she remained alive inside Zeus. Eventually, she gave birth to a daughter, the wise Athena. Metis worked from within Zeus' body to hammer out a coat of armor for her daughter to wear. The hammering caused Zeus discomfort, and so he had his head cleaved open to alleviate the pressure. This allowed Athena to escape. She went on to become an important goddess to the Greeks, associated, like her mother, with wisdom. But for some reason Metis did not escape with her daughter and remained inside Zeus. He reportedly utilized her as a source of wise counsel during his reign, and she was often depicted supporting his throne from underneath, propping it up, like a royal slave. What a raw deal, I thought as I pondered these stories again. I wonder what kept her from leaving with Athena. Was it the chains? On the Mete coffer, the goddess was shown holding a pair of chains. The sun was shown attached to the top of one chain and the moon to the other, with the solar and lunar faces shown upside down. These chains also appear to have been shackled to Mete's legs. The image seemed to me to be showing her in the midst of breaking the chains from her ankles, while simultaneously dragging the heavenly bodies down from the sky. Was the destruction of the Archontic Order Mete's revenge for being imprisoned and enslaved by Zeus? I wondered. The Gnostics saw Sophia Achamoth as a heroine, trying to help them escape the jail of illusory existence. Maybe the idea is that she's trapped inside here with the rest of us, so her escape is also our chance for escape. On the Templar artifact that featured the candelabra being extinguished, the figure of Mete on the right is holding the chains, without the heavenly bodies included, which the horned figure of Mete on the left is holding a banner displaying Arabic writing. Hammer Purgstall's translation of this writing includes the phrases, Mete is exalted, and 1 and 7 were our race, referring, he thought, to the Gnostic belief that Sophia Achamoth was the mother of the other 7 archons. If Mete is exalted, I thought, that means that she's somehow escaped from inside Zeus. But how? Maybe through the rectum? The reason I thought about this was not just because it's the only obvious way out if one's been swallowed. It also occurred to me because another phrase written in Arabic on Mete's banner next to the candelabra is, he makes return easy through the rectum. Hammer Purgstall hadn't really deciphered the meaning of this, except to identify it as being related to the rumored Templar rites of sodomic pederasty, now confirmed because of their confessions to the Pope, documented in the Chinon parchment released by the Vatican in 2007. But now, as I pondered this, I wondered if that was why the sun and moon were shown upside down. Perhaps it is really Mete, who is upside down, I thought, coming out through the rear exit. Maybe that's the meaning of the message he found on the back of the idol of Mete carrying a baby. I was thinking about yet another Templar artifact, depicted in a line drawing in Hammer Purgstall's work. It showed a figure of uncertain sex in a hooded robe holding an infant. On the back of the idol, Hammer Purgstall reported that there was a message written in code. It was in Greek, but with Arabic letters, and transposed out of order. When decoded, they spelled out this message: Omnipotent Mete sprouting, A debauched woman springs up for our race through Procton. Procton in the Greek word for anus. Then another meaning of the inverted sun and moon, or, in the alternative interpretation, mete shown hanging upside down, also occurred to as I sat there thinking. I had written in the Baphomet papers that what we call Satanism was largely influenced by Gnosticism and its spiritual war against the creator of this physical universe. This is where the satanic principle of inverting Judeo-Christian symbols, prayers, and rituals came from. I argued that the Knights Templar may have themselves been the originators of this tradition, considering their secret initiation rite of urinating on the cross and denying Christ, again confirmed through recently revealed non-coerced confessions of the Knights. With this in mind, I thought of a new idea. I combed through files on my computer until I found a folder with the Hammer Purgstall pictures, including the lid of the Mete coffer, the picture of the hooded idol holding the baby, and the image the naked lady pouring water on the candles in between the two Metes. I looked at them both with contemplation. While the Tenebrae is a Christian ritual, the one illustrated on Hammer Purgstalls, Templar artifact was, according to him, a more Gnostic interpretation of it. He related it to the fact that church fathers, Justin Martyr in particular, for instance, had accused Gnostics of practicing a blasphemous rite called the upsetting of the lamps. If this is truly a depiction of a Templar rite, I thought, it was undoubtedly meant as a sacrilegious celebration of the destruction of the Archons. They might have even done the whole Tenebrae as an overtly satanic black mass, snuffing out the light of the sun, too, and thus killing Christ, according to the symbolism. As I finished my breakfast at the hotel restaurant, I decided to move on to the Drudge Report for the day's headlines. I found that the previous day there had been yet another precipitous fall in the value of the pound. You may recall that this had been happening ever since the government had decided to essentially nullify the meaning of Britain's plan to exit from the European Union. They had put it off indefinitely in a state of declared emergency that everyone assumed would never be lifted. This was good for my exchange rate while visiting, but bad for the natives, I knew. What was worse, the government refused to acknowledge the obvious cause of the instability, blaming it instead on the recent string of homegrown terrorist attacks in the name of ISIS, necessitating yet more police state expansion. In the UK, from what I read, everyone was actually pining for a royal decree to overrule the elected government, which had so clearly been derelict in its duty to honor the will of the people. The newest prime minister was even more faithless than the last, but although the Queen hadn't been seen in over 3 months, she still occasionally signed documents and appeared to be set to live forever. She was rumored to be bedridden on something akin to life support, albeit still conscious. People such as me, persistent hounds of alternative news data, had kept up on the rumors. However, the topic was being censored in the mainstream news, and all major social media platforms had placed it on the ever-growing list of forbidden topics. If the rumors were true, I knew, then the Queen was unlikely to be leading any revolutions against the government on behalf of her beleaguered subjects. As I read the news, I compulsively reloaded my email, hoping to get word from Leopold, who by now should have noticed that I hadn't arrived on time. But it was in vain. He said nothing. Another phone call placed from my room again yielded no results. Eventually, I boarded the shuttle, rode through a giant forest of floating roof tanks filled with petroleum products, and then boarded another plane. Although I stayed on the aircraft for another 15 hours, with 2 stops along the way, the rest was a much smoother ride than the first leg. I had the entire row to myself, so I got to stretch out and rest. I used the bathroom whenever I wanted. They fed us a couple of meals and showed us a movie, the new remake of Zardoz. I hate remakes, so I didn't put the headphones on to listen. Instead, I laid on the seats and tried not to wonder if Leopold Black had gotten my message yet. Chapter 5. Terribilis est locus iste. Boasting a prime location and unbeatable prices, the Regent Palace is easily one of the best value lodgings in London. Within minutes of entertainment, fine dining, and shopping venues, the hotel is attractive to both business and leisure guests seeking the ultimate bargain. Accommodations all consist of color TV, direct dial telephone, and wash basin, and of the 888 rooms within the hotel, 385 have their own ensuite bathroom. regentpalacehotel.co.uk 2005 My fake-it-till-you-make-it false bravado had kept me going through this inauspicious adventure so far. But that began to fade when I was finally able to take my phone out of airplane mode and into Sprint Global Roaming. I used the Gmail app to check my email when I found that there was still no answer from Leopold Black, and my heart began to sink. I was actually wondering if this had all been an elaborate and expensive joke, in which several £1,000s had been spent just to waste my time. The fear must have been apparent on my ashen face, because as I went through customs, the young white English lady who interrogated me about my business in the UK gave me special attention. "Are you all right?" she said, looking me over with suspicion. She stared straight into my eyes to intimidate me, forcing me to stare back. "Your face looks very pale." Well, I am naturally quite pale, and I must have looked even more so as I stood there in front of her. But I got the feeling that she actually thought I might be wearing heavy makeup to hide a darker complexion. I could feel her trying to unmask me with her eyes. Then she just came right out and said it. "Frankly, you look a bit off." Now I could feel myself getting angry. Off what? I thought. Off my rocker? I couldn't let it boil over, though, as this was a delicate situation. I knew she was just being vigilant because of the stabbings by ISIS agents that had happened at Gatwick, the other London airport, a week previous. I thought of a way to express my annoyance that would surely shut her up and allow me to be on my way. "Ma'am," I said, "are you telling me that you find me suspicious because of the color of my skin?" Her face curled up into the trademark regretful half-smile of white guilt. This look is usually only given to ethnic minorities who have just been subjected to special scrutiny because of their race, only to be found innocent. I returned it with the most genuine smile I could muster, and reached out to take back my passport from her after she finished stamping it. As I made my way to the baggage claim area, I searched fruitlessly for the sight of a chauffeur holding a sign that said, "Pamela Auger," but none was forthcoming. I watched all the luggage from my transcontinental flight circle around the conveyor belt 15 or 20 times. After determining that my suitcase was not on it, I filed a report with United Airlines staff and made my way out to the taxi stand, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. I got into a black taxi with a Pakistani driver. We drove for about 40 minutes to get to my hotel. Thankfully, he did not make any small talk. Instead, he listened to endlessly looped reports about the currency crisis and the latest ISIS attacks in Europe on Sky News Radio, while he muttered under his breath about the traffic. London was in many ways just how I remembered it from previous trips there, but the vibe was a bit more intense. As we passed 10 Downing Street, I saw soldiers with machine guns. Twice we went through toll booths on the way. When we got to the first one, the driver asked me if I had any cash to pay it. I told him I didn't have any local currency yet, so he charged it to my card with the rest of my fare. I was glad I had insisted that Leopold pay $3,000 up front. If I had come there with only my own means to support me, I wouldn't have even been able to finish the cab ride. Piety had come to me as of late, and so I thanked God that I was okay so far, even though I wondered, as I always have, which God I was praying to. I was even more grateful to this unknown deity when I found that my room was still reserved for me. As I checked into the Regent Palace, where plaques on the wall proudly boasted of the building's historical significance, I anticipated enjoying a shower, a nap, and room service in what I thought would be opulence, judging from the elegant decor of the lobby. I was ready to flop down immediately, but found I had to walk up several flights of stairs. Someone was presently stuck in the elevator, and a half-dozen firemen were working to try to rescue them. When I finally reached the 7th floor, room 729, I was breathless. I shoved the key in the hole, for they still used metal keys in this old building. When I stumbled in, I just about tripped over the narrow bed. It actually looked like a prison cot, and the room was barely big enough to hold it. In fact, the bed was the only thing in the room. There was no furniture, and no space for any. If I had brought my suitcase, I don't know where I would have put it. "Oh my God," I said out loud to myself. "Are you kidding me?" I couldn't believe that the Baron of Alphamstone and his friends at the WSB were so cheap that they booked me for such a terrible place. Despite my shock, I really needed to pee, so I located the bathroom, which was accessible through a narrow door that stood right next to the foot of the bed. There were 2 steps leading up to it, because the floor of the bathroom was raised up about a foot higher than the main room. It was about the size of an airplane restroom. There was a small toilet and a little pedestal sink, with a tiny basin that sort of hovered over the toilet seat. Next to it was a diminutive shower, with a tile floor and a plain blue plastic curtain. It reminded me of a shower I used at a campground in Ohio once. After I had washed and relieved myself, I went back into the main room, put on my dirty clothes again, and opened the window. It only opened about an inch, and the only view was of the hotel's roof, along with the windows of other upper-floor rooms. The top floors of the building, which I was on, only had rooms around the perimeter. This created a trapezoid-shaped space between them when the building was looked at from an aerial view. As I discovered later from looking at the site on Google Earth, the window had been fixed to only open an inch so as to prevent people from walking out on the roof. I suppose it should not have surprised me, considering the state of the other accommodations, when I realized that the hotel did not have any Wi-Fi available. When I couldn't find a signal, I used the gray 1950s-era rotary phone attached to the wall to call down to the lobby. When they told me there was no internet, I tried calling Leopold again, and again got no answer. Since I could clearly accomplish nothing from my hotel room, I packed up my laptop and headed out into the streets of London. Chapter 6. Eros and Anteros. Love is the law, love under will. Nor let the fools mistake love, for there are love and love. There is the dove, and there is the serpent. Choose ye well. Aleister Crowley, The Book of the Law. I walked out of my hotel and into the throngs. It was still mid-morning, and there were people out everywhere. The lady at the front desk had told me there was a bank across the street where I could use the ATM. I looked, and my chest instinctively constricted with fear as I saw the familiar logo of Barclays, the company that called me 3 times a day regarding my £3,000 debt to the British Museum. But I needed cash, and I figured there was no real danger in using their ATM. I walked over and used the machine to extract £100 from my bank account. I then stepped into the corner shop next door and bought a bottle of Orangina to break one of the £20 notes. I had the Indian kid at the counter pour the resulting 20-plus coins weighing approximately 1 metric fuckton into the outside pocket of my laptop case. My shoulders smarted under the weight, and my body leaned right to compensate. "When are they going to make a £1 note, for God's sake?" I muttered to myself. I walked out of the store and immediately noticed a statue of Cupid standing on top of a fountain at Piccadilly Circus, which was directly in front of me. I decided to sit underneath it while I looked at a London Underground map that I had gotten from the front desk at Regent Palace. I was trying to figure out how to get to the Houses of Parliament on the tube. The place where I sat happened to be next to a plaque that explained the statue. As it turned out, it was actually a figure of Anteros, the brother of Eros, the Greek version of Cupid. He was the god of counter-love, and he bore butterfly wings instead of the cherubic wings of his brother. This, as Wikipedia explained to me on my phone for 20 cents a minute, was taken by most to mean that he was the god who punished unrequited love. In other words, if you were in love with somebody and they didn't love you back, you could call on him to get revenge. My sixth sense for occult symbolism started to itch at the sight of this explanation. It just didn't seem complete. It felt to me like a cover story to hide the dirty truth, as I so often found whenever I dug beneath the surface of folklore and mythology. The interpretation offered by the designer of the fountain was even more tame, calling Anteros the god of selfless love. It was supposedly meant to be a monument to Lord Shaftesbury, a peer of the realm and philanthropist from the late 19th century. He had worked all his life to improve the lot of miners, children working in factories, and lunatics living in asylums. The statue was meant to represent his love for people who could not return his love. This struck me as an odd, awkward, and forced metaphor. Why conflate charitable and reformist work with something that is obviously an erotic symbol? In fact, at the time it had been installed, there had been many objections to its, quotes, pagan sensuality. Most people in modern times still assume that Shaftesbury Fountain is a statue of Eros when they see it. As if to underscore this, there was even an adult theater called Eros Cinema that had once stood right in front of the statue. Indeed, the entire corner had been a haven for burlesque parlors, dirty movies, and prostitution. There was even a debunked rumor going around that Piccadilly was an old word for prostitution in some language. The most significant aspect of the statue, as far as I was concerned, was the arrow he was aiming with him, Beau. Because Lord Shaftesbury made most of his reformist efforts through the House of Lords, the arrow in Anteros, Beau had been designed to aim directly at Parliament, just where I was headed. I decided that was no coincidence, and that I had better be on about my business. When I looked again at the tube map, however, I found that there was no train going directly there from the Piccadilly station. I would have to either walk to another station or take a series of trains. So I decided once again to rely on Google, and found that it was better for me to take bus number 159 by walking over to the corner of Haymarket and Orange Street. I stood up and began to walk east down Coventry Street. Then I took a right to go south on Haymarket, and my eyes were instantly drawn to another interesting landmark. It was right in front of the doors of the Criterion Theater, underneath the balcony. Again, it was a statue decorating a fountain, this one of 4 horses, all reeling back on their hind legs. The inscription on the fountain identified them as the horses of Helios, the sun god. I took a picture of it with my phone and walked on. But I kept looking behind me. It was as if I could feel their eyes on me. The horses, that is. After walking about 2 blocks, I saw the red double-decker I was looking for headed my way. 1 block ahead was my bus stop, marked with a sign, which I reached just in time. No one else was there, but the driver spotted me and pulled over. I asked her to announce my stop, and she said she would. It wasn't very crowded, but I remained standing behind the driver so that I could watch for my stop. 7 minutes later, I was at Westminster Station on Parliament Street. I walked to the corner of Bridge Street and saw Big Ben up ahead on the left, or, more properly, Elizabeth Tower, as Big Ben is really the name of one of the bells inside. I crossed the street to the corner that the clock tower was on, then followed the crowd to an opening in the fence where people were walking back and forth. Up ahead, I saw a man walking in through one of the doors in a corner of the building, right beneath the clock. So I followed him, walking past a hedged enclosure with an opening in the side. As I went past, I saw a fountain featuring statues of an emaciated unicorn and several other macabre-looking heraldic creatures. When I got to the door, I was rebuffed by a security guard who told me that strangers had to enter through St. Stephen's Gate down the street. So I walked back past the hedges and turned left when I got to the sidewalk. I went on until I saw the statue of Oliver Cromwell on my left that the security guard had told me to look for. There I turned left onto the walkway that led directly to the visitors' entrance. I walked down a ramp towards a vaulted doorway, in front of which there were 2 security guards wearing plastic gloves. They frisked me and searched my laptop case. Then they let me in. I entered a giant empty hall with stone floors and a huge vaulted ceiling made of carved wood. I then turned left to go up some stone steps and through an arched wooden doorway with a clock above it that led to St. Stephen's Hall. This was a corridor where the walls were covered with beautiful, full-color murals of scenes from British history, and stained glass windows depicting more such scenes above that. All along the walls were white stone statues of important Englishmen, including some inset into the walls in the corner, and stone benches covered with leather the color of Brunswick green. Brilliant chandeliers hung from the ceiling. At the end of this hall was another vaulted doorway underneath yet another clock, which led to the central lobby. I went through the door and emerged into an octagonal room situated underneath an amazing, gold-covered, mosaicked dome. There were more stained glass windows beneath the dome, and many more statues set into the wall. Then I looked down to see a giant black 8-pointed star in the middle of the mosaic floor, composed of 2 squares at opposite angles. The points of one of the squares were aligned with each of 4 corridors that led elsewhere, including the one I had just come out of. The points of the other square were aligned with statues set between these, presumably of important British politicians from the past. I strolled up to the secretary's desk in the corner to my left. Behind it stood a white man in a black suit with a white blouse and a black bow tie. He was talking on a black desk phone. I waited for him to finish his conversation. After a few seconds, he looked up at me, put his hand over the receiver, and asked what he could do for me. I told him that I was a friend of one of the lords, the Baron of Alphamstone. "Can you buzz his office to see if he's there?" I said hopefully. "Excuse me," the man replied, looking very confused. "The Baron of Alphamstone?" "Yes, Leopold Black," I said. "Please see if he's in. If not, I'll leave a message." When he heard the words Leopold Black, he raised his eyebrows. "Can I have your name, please?" he said. "Sure," I replied. "My name is Pamela Auger." He knows who I am. "Would you have a seat on one of the benches, please?" he then asked. He started talking into his phone again. He had pointed to my left at a blue leather bench, one of several lining the walls. It was right behind a statue of some guy named William Ewart Gladstone, and underneath a smaller statue that was set into the wall. I sat down there and turned around to check out the statue above me. But then I heard footsteps approaching, so I turned to look in front of me. There were two men in their 30s approaching me. One had Persian features and dark hair in a Beatles cut. The other one was white and ginger, with curls and a mustache. They were both wearing gray suits of slightly different shades. "Ms. Auger," said the Persian, "would you come with us, please? We'd like to speak to you about the person calling himself the Baron of Elphinstone." Chapter 7. Regnum Defende. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords. The Beatles, A Day in the Life. The food served to MPs and their guests at the Terrace Café in the House of Commons, where I was taken by my two new friends from the security services, seemed rather plebeian, a bit like the lunches served to kids in public schools in the U.S. However, I was assured by Agent Paris and Agent Chesterfield that the ingredients were high quality, local, and completely free of GMOs. I picked out some lasagna, and both men ordered a sandwich, with coffees all around. Chesterfield, the redhead with the thin mustache, insisted on paying. We sat outside on the terrace, overlooking the River Thames, right next to the cafe, a sort of black and white striped, tented structure with glass walls. The two agents took seats across the table from me, with their backs to the river, so that I could enjoy the view. The giant Ferris wheel, the London Eye, was spinning in the distance off to my left. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what they were going to say, but it seemed likely they were going to tell me there was something phony about Leopold, after all. Therefore, I would likely never see the rest of the money he had promised me. Whatever they were going to say, it was going to be a letdown. I was already embarrassed that I had let myself be fooled somehow. I braced myself for bad news and nervously picked at my lasagna. It was extremely bland, if it's possible for blandness to be extreme. Paris noticed the look on my face when I took my first bite. "Is this your first time in England?" He looked me straight in the eye, penetratingly, and I knew that he knew what I was thinking. They just don't use spices in this country for some reason. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew that he knew, and that he knew I knew. The words that I was thinking were being transmitted directly into his brain, and it was as though I could see them reflected in his eyes. This is a bad rapport to establish with a government agent who is about to interrogate you. I looked at the river to break the eye contact. A cruise ship drifted by, packed with tourists. "No," I said. "I've been here once before, as a teenager. Family holiday." "So what's your business here now?" Chesterfield asked directly. "Research," I answered. "I mainly want to have a look at some of the museums. I'm a writer." "Oh yes, I've seen," said Chesterfield, grinning. "Dan Brown kind of stuff. Occult mysteries and such." He showed me his phone, a Samsung Galaxy, which was open to an Amazon.com page with all of my books listed. "Dan Brown writes fiction," I replied, cold, but I should have just let it go. "Don't offer them any information," I reminded myself, "and don't let that Persian guy read your mind." "So what's your business with the Baron of Elphinstone?" Paris asked with a sneer, making finger quotes. Forced to look back in his direction, I concocted something on the spot, knowing he wouldn't believe me. I was supposed to interview him about his family history. They're supposedly related to the Merovingians. Dan Brown kind of stuff. I returned my gaze to the redhead, whose stare was less invasive and yet somehow more charming, more seductive, perhaps because he seemed safer. But I knew I shouldn't let down my guard with him either. I drank some of my coffee. It was cold already and watery with a grimy sediment on the bottom. Chesterfield cleared his throat and prepared to lecture to me. "Elphinstone, my dear, is a village in Essex with less than 100 residents. It is not associated with a barony. The man you are calling the Baron of Elphinstone is actually Thomas Weir, a man who's been living on benefits for over 20 years because of psychological disabilities." He made finger quotes too. I noticed his left middle finger was shorter than the others. I stared at it. The tip was missing. "Wood shop accident," Paris said behind me, showing off that he was reading my thoughts again. "Frankly, he's so clumsy I don't know why they ever let him on the service." He chuckled. "Oh, puff off," said Chesterfield, waving his butchered hand at his colleague as if to dismiss him. "I don't understand," I said. "There's a page about Leopold Black, Baron of Elphinstone, on the official Parliament website." "He's not a peer," Paris insisted. He's not noble at all. He just pretends to be so he can sell fake fancy titles to credulous foreigners, especially Americans. They're a gullible lot when it comes to this stuff. Even you, and you're an investigator. He wagged his finger at me as if to chastise me. He was openly demonstrating the fact that he was fully aware of what kind of writer I was, unlike his partner who played dumb. Well, he never sold any titles to me, I said, ignoring his slight. I never gave him any money. In fact, I stopped. Better not mention the lecture, I thought, or the Oriental Club, the Worshipful Society of Butchers, the money he'd sent me, nor the fact that he, or they, had paid for my trip. Better not even think it. Was he paying you for something? Paris asked. Of course. He had picked up on my thoughts. No, I replied, assuming that as a non-citizen I had no real obligation to tell them the truth about something that was surely none of their business. I opened my laptop, found the open Wi-Fi from the cafe, and tried to load the Barron's page on the Parliament website. To my surprise, I got a 404 not found. I don't understand, I said. It was there just a couple of days ago. Let me see, said Chesterfield. He leaned over my right shoulder and put his left hand on the back of my chair to steady himself. Then he pressed in closer and pointed at the domain name at the top of the page. That's not the official Parliament website. It's 2 letters off. He put his thumb on the touchpad in the backspace, then shortened the URL to what should have been the index page. It was 404.2. The entire website was gone. He hired someone to make a fake version of the Parliament website with an entry about him in it. The real one is parliament.uk, not co.uk. I felt like a total dumbass. Oh, how he fooled me, I thought, and I took money from him in notable amounts. Where did he get it? From selling titles? Is that how he was able to rent out the Oriental Club so he could shoot that video conference with me? All this time he was just a jobless con man? My head was full of questions, but I certainly couldn't ask these 2 guys. In fact, I felt that I needed to lose them right away so that I could get to the bottom of things on my own. Well, lads, thank you for revealing the truth to me, I said. I feel pretty stupid, but I guess it's better I find out now rather than after I write a book or an article based on something he told me. I closed my laptop and started to pack it away, signaling that I was ready for them to let me go. I guess I'll just move on to my real reason for being here, which is the museums, as I said. I stood up to leave. Oh, we can take you, said Chesterfield. He actually grabbed my wrist to keep me from leaving. Which one are you going to first? He smiled at me, and then self-consciously softened his grip on me for a second before dropping it completely. Paris shot him a disapproving glance. You dirty bastard. I read the thoughts as he intended me to. The British Museum, of course, I replied. Well, let's go then, said Chesterfield, lightly brushing my lower spine with his left hand as he pushed my chair back in for me. Can I carry your case? No, thank you, I said. The contact between his hand and my back created some kind of electrical charge that radiated through the rest of my body and left me feeling flushed. I knew that he was trying to charm me, probably using sophisticated conversational hypnosis techniques, and it was working. Worst of all was the feeling that Agent Paris knew exactly what was happening and was laughing at me for it. I looked, and sure enough, he had a sneering grin on his face as he regarded me. I waited with Chesterfield outside in the old palace yard, while Paris walked down Millbank to the Kew Park on the other side of the Abingdon Street Gardens to pick up their car. As we stood there, Chesterfield asked about my books. I gave him vague answers, not willing to make the effort to describe my work to a newbie. He didn't seem to mind. He just kept smiling at me. He tried to get me to give him my email, purportedly so that he could buy some of my books directly from me. But when I put him off by telling him just to get them from Amazon, he changed his tactic. Look, the truth is that the security services have an ongoing investigation on this weird fellow, he said, suddenly acting serious. Who? I had forgotten the guy's real name. The one you called the Baron of Alphamstone. You're a witness. We may have more questions for you. You'll have to give us your email and your address and your phone number too. There's some paperwork you'll have to fill out in the car before we let you go. For a moment I found the thought of him calling me in to his office to detaining and interrogate appealing for some reason. I chalked it up to the mind control tactics he and his partner were both using. Must be something they teach you in training, I thought. We heard a honk as a black Vauxhall Astra Elite, recent model, pulled up in front of us. The doors unlocked, Chesterfield opened the rear door and gestured gallantly for me to enter. Then he boorishly slid in right beside me, instead of taking the passenger seat in the front as I would have expected him to. He stared at me lasciviously, an evil gleam in his green eyes and his red eyebrows cocked at a devilish angle. I was sure he was going to grab my pussy. Right there, Trump style. But instead he reached into a pocket on the back of the seat in front of me and pulled out a packet of carbon copy forms for me to fill out. "Put your contact info here, initial here, and sign here," he said. "You're just acknowledging that you voluntarily answered our questions, and that you weren't forcibly detained." He said that last part with far too much enjoyment. It took 15 minutes to get to the museum. We had to cross the river twice and pay a toll. We first crossed to the other side via the Lambeth Bridge, and as we turned on it, they both proudly pointed out to me their agency's headquarters, a building called Thames House located further on down Millbank. "So did Weir actually make an appointment to meet with you in the House of Lords today?" Paris asked as he drove. It was the first real question either of them had asked me. "No," I said. "He just told me to look him up there next time I was in town. I guess he never expected that I'd actually show up." "When's the last time you spoke to him?" Paris queried. "Probably a week ago," I said truthfully. My lies were getting sloppy. "So you told him you were coming to London to do research?" Paris inquired. "Well, yes," I said. I couldn't think of a way around it. "But you didn't make a specific appointment to meet," Paris pressed. "No, just an informal agreement," I replied. "I just said I'd drop by sometime, that's all. I was hoping he wouldn't probe further." "So did you talk to him on the phone?" Paris asked. "No, just email. I told him I didn't want to mention the Skype conversation, or the phone number he'd given me where nobody ever answered." "Well," said Chesterfield, tenderly grabbing my hand and folding my fingers around a business card. "Here's my number if you remember anything that might be useful to us. Especially if he contacts you again. Don't tell him that we spoke or that you found out the truth about him. Try to make an appointment with him, and then let us know where you're going to meet." I looked at the card. It had the Regnum Defende MI5 logo with a dragon-tailed lion surrounded by portcullises and pentagonal rose symbols. It was a good thing. Her Majesty had these two fine men to defend her realm from the mischievous con men trying to sell titles to fake baronies. I mentally laughed at the ridiculous situation I now found myself in. "Sure thing," I said. The car came to a stop in front of the south entrance of the museum, with its massive columned pediment in the style of ancient Greece. I managed to get out of the car somewhat smoothly without making further promises or giving away any more information, but not before Chesterfield kissed my hand ridiculously, causing his partner to shake his head in embarrassment. The car sped off as soon as I shut the door. I walked quickly through the courtyard and up the large steps to the doorway, eager to get out of open view as quickly as possible. Chapter 8. Non Sequitur. The great secret of magic, the unique and incommunicable arcana, has for its purpose the placing of supernatural power at the service of the human will in some way. To attain such an achievement, it is necessary to know what has to be done, to will what is required, to dare what must be attempted, and to keep silent with discernment. Eliphas Levi, The Great Secret. Having finally shaken loose of my interrogators, I wandered through grand halls filled with the greatest treasures in the world in a blind daze, hardly noticing any of it. After paying my donation to get in, I entered a large open court with an egg-shaped reading room carving out a large chunk of space in the middle. The first room I saw to my left was full of Egyptian stuff. I sat on a blonde wooden bench underneath a gigantic broken bust of Ramesses II and tried to collect my thoughts. So Leopold is a fraud. Where is he now? Have the police and MI5 already questioned him? Presumably he hasn't been arrested yet, but perhaps they shut him down, or he shut himself down, realizing the game was over. But what was the game? The agents' claims made no sense. Leopold hadn't tried to sell me any titles, which surely would have been the point of faking his membership in a wealthy British gentleman's club. It would have been an expensive ruse. He had been seeking information from me, rather than trying to convince me of anything. He had spent a considerable amount of money on me, rather than trying to get me to buy anything. He'd lied to me about being a baron and a peer of the realm, but without mentioning anything about providing titles for others. So what was the point then? I was too worked up about all of these questions to take in the museum properly. But that wasn't really why I was there. I wanted to see for myself the Very items of interest which I had traveled all of this way to talk about but had never actually laid eyes on. I walked back out into the great court and up to the closest information desk. This was a large, black, circular object near the entrance. Several agents were working there, all wearing uniforms of black pants and blue shirts. They all were busy with other customers except one on the end. She was an overweight Persian lady in her 20s, with her hair in a messy bun. Her name tag said Parveen. I walked up to her. "Hi," I said. "I was wondering if you could tell me how to find one of the items in your online catalog." "Certainly," she said. "What do you know about it?" "It's a limestone coffer, item number 1866, 1229.143 in the Duc de Blacas collections," I said, reading off information from an email accessible on my phone. Parveen typed into her computer. She said. "That item number is coming up as not found." "Was it donated by Louis de Blacas or Pierre?" "Louis, I believe," I said. She looked disappointed. "That's a large collection, unfortunately," she said. "What else can you tell me about it?" "Well, it was labeled as having an image of Cybele on the top." She typed into her computer some more, presumably using keywords. Then she shook her head sideways again. "Well, I'm not finding any limestone coffers at all, I'm afraid," she said. "Could it be in another collection?" "That's impossible," I said. "I knew it wasn't on display, but it should still be here." "Who told you it was here?" she asked. "The museum staff," I answered, feeling frustrated. "Through email. They let me search through the digital catalog until I found it. Then I paid them to take some better photos of it, which they sent me. I combed through my Gmail archives until I found an attachment containing the photos of the lid of the Mette coffer. Then I turned my phone around to show Parveen the image of a naked, crowned, and bearded hermaphrodite gleefully pulling the sun and the moon upside down and out of the sky, with a pair of chains attached to both the heavenly bodies and the ankles of the goddess. Cybele is a goddess, not a hermaphrodite, Parveen smugly informed me. That's not what Catella said. I snapped back, not having time to explain the numerous counter-traditions indicating that the Magna Mater, or Great Mother, worshipped by both the Persians and the Romans, was originally described as a hermaphrodite that had been castrated and cast out of Olympus by the other gods. Anyway, it was your museum that labeled it Cybele, I said. "And you said you got that photo from us?" she asked, sounding incredulous. "Yes," I replied. "And I paid this institution to take good photographs, which I published in a book last year for the first time, even though this artifact has been mentioned in books about the Knights Templar with only line drawings available to print for over 150 years. I am the one who brought this historical item, which your museum has been sitting on and ignoring, into the light of day. Now I'd like to finally see it." Parveen wasn't looking at me or my phone anymore. She was typing into her computer again. When I stopped talking, she looked up. "What did you say your name was?" she asked. I didn't say, I told her. "But I'm Pamela Auger. I'm a writer." She hit the keys a few more times. "Oh yes," she said. "I see that you still have an outstanding balance of £3,000 for photograph rights." She smiled a gotcha smile, and her eyes gleamed. "Yes, and the item in the photo that I owe money for the rights to is the one I'm asking you to locate for me right now." I smiled. Surely she's just an information desk clerk, not a collection agent, I thought. Her primary job is to help visitors find things they're looking for, not to catch people who owe money to the museum. Well, I'll call in the accounts receivable department. Maybe they can help us figure out where this coffer is, and I'm sure they can work out some payment arrangements for you. Just a second. She picked up her phone again and smiled evilly. Have I really pissed her off that much? I thought. All this just because I mentioned that I had made history with an item they'd been ignoring? My honesty, and perhaps my arrogance as well, was about to screw me out of a chance to see the coffer, and instead drive me straight into the greedy hands of bill collectors. I suddenly wanted to flee. I turned around with the intention of doing exactly that, but then I bumped into a body in light brown leather cap-toe Oxford shoes, and a light brown suit that was topped with a familiar old face. It was Leopold Black. At that moment, even though I knew he was a fraud, I was happy to see him. "What's he doing here?" I wondered. "I thought I might find you here," he said. Looking for the coffer? Yes, I said, but they're having trouble finding it. They seem more interested in talking to me about the money I owe them, and that's not the strangest thing that's happened to me today. Why haven't you been answering the phone? I wasn't sure if I should tell him what I knew or play dumb and pump him for information, as Agent Chesterfield had encouraged me to do, but I desperately wanted to get away from that information desk before accounts receivable showed up. Well, you won't find it here anymore, he said. It's gone. It's been stolen. What? I said, disbelieving him. Despite what Parveen had told me, I couldn't accept that anything could be stolen from the British Museum without it being a news story. Also, Leopold/Thomas was a known liar. Yes, it's gone, and we need to get gone too, he said. Come with me. Okay, I said. I'd like to get a decent coffee. I also need to find a clothing store. They lost my luggage, and I've been wearing this outfit for 3 days. We headed towards the entrance, but from behind, I heard my name being called by a deep male voice. Ms. Auger. Walk faster, said Leopold. We can't let them catch us. You mean accounts receivable? I said. I'm just gonna leave. They can't make me stay. Still, I did walk faster. The voice called me again. Ms. Auger, please come back here for a moment. Now I was almost running, panicking, wanting to avoid confrontation. Leopold kept pace. We sprinted down the steps and across the courtyard, with now 2 pursuers, whom I saw peripherally to be large men in dark suits following behind at a steady pace but not running after us. As we neared the curb of Great Russell Street, Leopold hailed a black car with tinted windows that looked like its arrival was perfectly timed. He opened the back door and basically shoved me in. Before the door closed, I heard that same familiar voice shouting at me from behind us. Ms. Auger, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. Leopold shut the door, and the doors locked automatically. That's when I realized that this was not a taxicab, as there were no meters and no official identification. It was a private car. The driver, a blond guy in his 30s with a dark suit and black bowler hat, took orders from Leopold. Take us to the club, Miles, he said to the driver. Miles nodded and sped off, just as one of the men following us, who I saw to be black and husky, reached for the door handle and missed. Now my survival instinct kicked in. Leopold, I agreed to go down the street for coffee with you, not to get in a private car. Where are you taking me? To the Oriental Club, of course, he said. You're going to make the presentation I hired you to do. A chill went through me. Who is this man that I've foolishly gotten into a car with, I thought, and what is he going to do to me? Actually, I'd like to get out now, I said. I then addressed the driver. Can you pull the car over, please? He ignored me. My fear turned into a full freak-out. I demand that you let me out of this car right now, I screamed. I picked up my phone, though I didn't know how to call the equivalent of 911 in this country. I didn't have time to think about who to call because Leopold snatched the phone out of my hand with a forcefulness that surprised me for a man his age. Pamela, do not panic, or I will give you a reason to panic, he said. What a scary thing to say, I thought. I unlocked my door and reached for the handle, ready to take my chances and jump out straight onto the pavement below, hoping I could aim for the sidewalk at least instead of being crushed immediately by the car behind us. But Leopold grabbed my hand and pressed something cold and hard against my chest. I looked down. It was a silver handgun. I sat back, terrified. What do you want from me? I sobbed. Just your professional analysis, he answered. Now cooperate. Chapter 9. Oriental Club. Between South Moulton Street and Stratford Place, Calvary's Foot, where the victims were preparing for sacrifice their cherubim, their inmost palaces, resounded with preparation of animals wild and tame. William Blake Milton. At times like this, you find yourself wishing you'd attached a rider to your contract. The client must provide his actual legal name. No involuntary transport of my person. Kidnapping. No guns or threats of murder. Pick me up at the airport, for Christ's sake. Return phone calls and emails related to business in a timely manner. And never, ever book me at a hotel room that cannot fit both my body and my suitcase simultaneously. Also, of course, a cancellation clause in case the above requirements are violated. But no recourse seemed available to me at that time, so I tried to calm myself down, wiping the tears from my puffy, reddened face that had not had the benefit of makeup in days. I concentrated on Leopold's hands, which I looked at close up for the first time. I noticed that they were both scarred all over and horribly contorted. It was almost as if each phalange had been separated from the others at some point, and then it had all been grafted back together again. Badly. I looked out the window to my left and saw a public park. A sign said, Hanover Square. I recalled that this was near where the Oriental Club actually did meet, at some place called Stratford House. But Leopold was holding my phone, so I couldn't use it to confirm this. I wondered what they were going to do with me, how much it would hurt, and if anyone would find my body. Finally, I turned again to my captor and inquired as to whether the projector and screen had been set up for my PowerPoint presentation. You'll have everything you need, I was told gruffly. The car stopped abruptly and pulled up next to the park. We walk from here, Leopold announced. The doors unlocked and he leaned over to pull the handle on my door with his right hand while he grabbed my right wrist with his left hand, which was so gnarly that my skin tried to crawl away from my body as soon as he touched it. He then wrapped his entire arm around mine so that he had firm control of my whole upper body. He pushed me out along with himself, and we emerged, stuck together. He then pulled me over to the corner, where we crossed the street after Miles drove off. I guess we just looked like a typical May to December couple. People walking past us didn't seem to notice that he was pressing a gun against my side, or that I was under extreme duress. I couldn't believe that something like this could happen in a large city in broad daylight, but it was happening. When we got to the other side of the street, Leopold stopped me for a moment and looked around. There was nobody else in our immediate vicinity. In front of us was a multi-purpose office building. I saw a sign for a Lloyd's TSB Bank in the lobby, and next to that, Barclays again. In my fear and paranoia, I tried desperately to understand what was going on. I turned to look at Leopold. You don't work for Barclays, do you? He shook his head sideways and laughed. I realized that didn't make any sense, especially since he had paid me thousands of dollars and spent thousands more to bring me here. That's a silly way to collect a debt, I thought. Just then, I felt someone come from behind and grab my left arm. It was Miles. He must have already parked the car. This way, please, he said politely as he and Leopold both dragged me off. They marched me past another building and across Hanover Street, then down a few doors to the left. We paused in front of the glass door of an art gallery with no name, simply labeled with the address 10 Hanover. In the middle of the day, it was closed and empty. There was a touchpad for an alarm. Miles keyed in the code while Leopold held me firm, never loosening his grip on my arm or the pressure of the gun on my ribcage. The door opened and I was ushered inside. The lights were off, but I could see the main room from the daylight coming through the glass door. I only saw two art pieces on display in the otherwise empty room. One was a giant Band-Aid, about a foot long, stuck to a canvas on the back wall, right next to a staircase leading down. The other was a large square canvas on the wall to my left, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, painted black with 3 yellow discs arranged in a downward-pointing triangle formation. Leopold noticed me noticing it. "What are you thinking?" he asked curiously. "Oh, I was just thinking that this reminds me of an image I saw in a movie once," I told him. "This whole experience is like being in a movie," I thought to myself. "Which one?" he prodded. "I think it was Invocation of My Demon Brother by Kenneth Anger," I answered. "Ah, yes, the Aleister Crowley worshipper with the horrible amateur movies that everybody calls art," he said. They shoved me to the left side of the room, around a bend, so that we were now out of sight from the front door. Leopold let me go and gave the gun to Miles, who now pressed it into my back underneath my left shoulder blade. Leopold lit a cigarette with a Zippo. They were Chesterfields. I didn't even know they made Chesterfields anymore. That, of course, made me think fondly of my favorite MI5 agent, wishing he and his partner were there to save me. "Actually," Leopold explained, "the yellow dots in the Kenneth Anger movie form a downward-pointing triangle. This," he said, jabbing his thumb at the painting behind him, "is based on the coat of arms for William Pitt. There's a statue of him in the park across the street." He started to walk towards the stairs and then stopped again. He turned around and looked at me, wagging his gnarly index finger at me. "But see, you were picking up on an Aleister Crowley vibe. That's why I hired you. There's more than just logic and knowledge at work in your brain. Though there is that. You're using a sixth sense to do your research too. I've known it for some time. That's why you're the one we need." He turned around and headed down the stairs. Miles and I followed. "Why?" I asked. "What's this got to do with Aleister Crowley?" When we reached the bottom of the stairs, we were in a dark, unfinished basement. I couldn't even see the walls to tell how large it was. Leopold turned towards me and ignited his lighter to illuminate his face. Crowley's Astron Argon Club had an office in that building down the street, at 10 Hanover Square, he said, pointing back up the stairs. Or at least in the building that used to be there. But aren't we in 10 Hanover now? I said, confused. I remembered the address on the front door. We're in 10 Hanover Street. The square is down there, he said, continuing to point. Miles winced. It's okay, Miles, Leopold assured him. She needs to know these things. Now, Crowley and his friends had access to the underground tunnel network beneath these streets, which leads to what was once the sub-basement of where the Oriental Club used to meet, at 18 Hanover Square. So not Stratford House? I inquired. That's right, he answered. They moved to Stratford House in the 60s. It's just a quarter mile away from here. But before that, Oriental Club was just a few feet away from Astron Argon's office, right across Hanover Square. Now, Crowley spent some time there, not as a dues-paying member, but as a guest. And the person who invited him in, whose name I shall withhold, also shared with him a secret, which should not have been disclosed, about the tunnel network. Crowley and his friends then began making nefarious use of the tunnels. We know this because when we were exploring down here, we found one of his secret shrines. What tunnels? I asked. And whose, we? The Worshipful Society of Butchers, Leopold replied. We walked over to a grimy, tile-covered wall, which I could now see only because of the flame from his lighter, and unlatched a hook that had been keeping a thin wooden door closed. It swung open, revealing a toilet, a sink, and an overflowing trash can. Miles let go of me and gave the gun back to Leopold, who held it sticking out towards me. I now had nobody holding me, but I dare not try to run. Miles pulled the trash can out of the bathroom and into the main room to get it out of the way. Then he brushed aside the remaining pile of used paper towels, revealing a green wooden hatch door, which he raised. Underneath was a deep shaft, with at least 2 rungs of a metal ladder visible from the top. This must be the entrance to the secret network of tunnels they were talking about, I thought. Miles went down first. Then a few seconds later, Leopold insisted I follow. I put the strap of the laptop case around my neck and let it hang from my back as I climbed down. Leopold extinguished his flame and waited for me to get to the bottom, still in pitch darkness. There Miles grabbed me with both hands and whistled to announce this. Then Leopold descended down the ladder himself. When he got to the bottom, he flicked his lighter back on temporarily and pointed his gun at me again. Then Miles let go of me and reached into his coat pocket to pull out a long silver cylinder. It was an LED flashlight, which he turned on, allowing Leopold to put out his lighter and return it to his pocket. I'm sorry that I have to point this gun at you, said Leopold, but I know that I can't trust you to cooperate yet. He pulled something out of his inner coat pocket and snapped it to unfurl it. It was a cloth, like a scarf. Turn around, he said. I complied. He tied the cloth over my eyes. I was completely blind. Oh, come on, I said. I can barely see as it is. There are some details I just can't trust you with, he said. Miles, take her bag, please. Miles relieved me of my burden, which actually was quite a relief physically. But now I had to worry about how I was going to get it back. Leopold then grabbed me from behind by the left shoulder. Put your arms out to your side, please, he instructed. I complied, bewildered. Forward 3 paces, please, and through the archway, Leopold continued. I walked ahead. After 2 steps, I felt a wall on either side of me. With a 3rd step, I walked through a passageway between them. I stepped into an open room of some sort. I could tell this because there was a change in air pressure, as well as in the acoustics of our footsteps, and a gentle breeze from above. Where are we going now? I said. You tell us, my dear Virgil, he commanded. What do you mean? I asked. Directly ahead of you are the entrances to 3 different corridors that you can go down, Leopold explained. 3 different avenues, all leading to the light, 3 different ways, through strength and beauty. But remember, he lectured, these paths all intersect with each other at several points on the journey. So in the long run, there will be numerous opportunities to change the road you are on. Therefore, fear not the outcome. Simply make a choice, and move ahead. But to make sure that you are perfectly lost, and therefore your choice all the more arbitrary, we shall give you a few spins around, just like a game of pin the tail on the donkey. Leopold took me by my left hand, and Miles took me by my right. Then they both began to spin me in a counterclockwise direction. Suddenly I understood, at least in part, their purpose for bringing me here. Leopold had surmised my clairvoyant powers when he realized that I was using intuition and divination tools in my occult research. He had figured out why I had been able to penetrate esoteric mysteries so deeply. Perhaps he's also overestimated my powers, I thought, and assumes I can control them. Maybe he doesn't realize that they work sporadically at best, and aren't always reliable. Either way, it certainly was starting to look like he brought me here to serve as a soothsayer. "Are you guys trying to use me as a human dowsing rod?" I asked, as I was being turned by them like a corkscrew. "In a way, yes," Leopold replied. They spun me around 7 times, at the end of which I was, as they intended, dizzy and completely disoriented. I stumbled forward a few feet. My hands caught the left side of another archway. "Excellent choice," said Leopold. "Steady on." I walked on through the archway and into a narrow tunnel with Leopold's hand on my shoulder once again. I reckon that Miles was somewhere behind us. "Don't you know where these tunnels lead? Or are you expecting me to tell you? Because I sure as hell don't know." "Yes, I know where they lead, dear. But I'm just not sure what station we need to be at next, so I am counting on you to intuit that for us. Don't worry, I have complete faith in you." And so we walked on for what felt like a quarter of a mile until we hit a wall. I sensed that we had reached another crossroads. I scuttled to the left and found that there was indeed a passageway there, so I turned left. But then I hesitated after a few steps. It smelled wet and moldy, like dirty towels. "Maybe we should go the other way," I said. "This might be leading into a sewer." "It's not," said Leopold. "Go on." "But there's a passageway going the opposite direction too, isn't there?" I asked. I got the sense that there was, and that I might have made the wrong choice. "Don't second-guess yourself," said Leopold. "Keep going." We trekked on for about another quarter of a mile. At one point I was sure that I heard a subway train passing over ahead, and Miles confirmed it. Then sometime after that, I saw, in my mind's eye, an old wooden door with a padlock on it. I stopped dead in my tracks. "There's no point in going on," I said. "There's a locked door. We would need the key." "She's good," said Miles. I then heard a key ring jangling, and a key being inserted into the lock. "Come on through," he said, guiding me through the door with his hand on my shoulders. "There's only one direction to go in from here." I stepped forward. Leopold stepped through behind me. Then he told me to stop. "Go ahead and take the hoodwink off, Miles," he ordered. The blindfold was removed. Now I could see the brick walls and floors of the corridor we were in, illuminated by the LED flashlight. It seemed centuries old. Up ahead several hundred feet, there was an opening leading to a round room, also lined floor to ceiling with brick. "You found it," said Leopold. "Congratulations." "I thought you needed me to guide you," I said resentfully. "We do," he replied. "That was just a test. A warm-up exercise." Miles pushed me forward again. I walked on, but just then I smelled something familiar. It was an odor I couldn't forget because of the years my parents spent tending a small ranch in Sherwood, Oregon. It was cow shit, unmistakably. "Are there any animals down here?" I asked. "It smells like cow patties." It seemed improbable, but my nose didn't lie. I sensed the beast's life force and its fear. Then I heard it low, mournfully. "Yes, well," Leopold's voice trailed off for a moment. Miles pushed me forward again. Then Leopold finished his sentence. "Animals often crap themselves the moment they realize they're about to die." I stumbled through the doorway into the room, terrified now, as a single fluorescent tube light hanging from the ceiling came on. This revealed the scene in front of me. A man in a black leather veil and a matching leather apron over a brown suit was standing in front of a 4-foot-high wooden table, covered also in black leather, with a large axe held aloft. Upon this table was pressed the neck of a bull, being held with a rope round its neck by another man, similarly dressed. The man with the axe brought it down on the neck of the bull, who bellowed loudly at the moment of first impact. The head came rolling off, and the blood began spurting outward in jets as I collapsed and fell down onto the brick floor, staring up at the beehive-shaped brick ceiling and the tube light beneath it, which got shot with a jet of blood just before I passed out. Chapter 10. Scrying at Stratford Place. The Duke of Wellington is said to have given the founders of the Oriental Club two pieces of characteristically succinct advice: have a club of your own, and buy the freehold. Anthony Lejeune, The Gentlemen's Clubs of London. I awoke with my face laying on my arms. I was seated in a straight-back wooden chair with no armrests. My arms and head were lying on a long, rectangular dining table, where I was seated at the head. Sitting around the rest of the table were maybe a dozen men and women of various ages, mostly white, but not exclusively. They were all dressed quite properly, as if for a night at the opera. All of them were staring directly at me. I saw in their faces, variously, curiosity, amusement, concern, and pity. At the other end of the table was a projector screen arranged on a stand. The decor around me was Victorian. Everything in a red-stained wood. Bookshelves filled with antique books lined the walls in front of me and to my left. Against the wall to my right was a little wooden table with two chairs. Leopold sat on the right side of the table, with a black rectangular object in his hand. Another gentleman, considerably older than him, sat on the left. Both looked very stern. I turned to look behind me. There was a portrait of the Duke of Wellington hanging over a white marble fireplace. I knew from the research I had done before the trip that I was in one of the dining rooms of Stratford House, where the Oriental Club held their meetings. Finally, I looked down at my own person and took note of my condition. I felt terrible. I was tired and dehydrated, with a pounding headache and sore muscles all over. But one condition had improved. I was no longer wearing the same soiled clothes I'd had on since I left Portland. Instead, I was sporting an elegant blue gown and matching pumps, with a lacy white shawl, white pearls around my neck, and a matching bracelet around my left arm. I reached up and ran my hands through my hair. It had been curled. I tried to rub my eyes, but the young lady next to me put her hand on my arm to stop me. "Oh, don't ruin your makeup," she said. "I worked hard on it." So they had changed my clothes and made me up, I thought. That means I was naked. What else did they do to me? "We had you fixed up a bit," said Leopold. "There's a dress code in this club." I glared at him. How did they do all that without waking me up? I wondered. I figured they must have given me a sedative after I passed out, which would explain why I still felt groggy. They could have done anything to me, I thought. "Don't worry, we had the women change your clothes and bathe you," Leopold said. "Your decency was kept intact the whole time." That only made me feel slightly better, and since I knew he was a liar, I didn't fully believe him. Still, it was nice to have fresh underwear. But then I thought of the bull decapitation, and the blood spurting out, and the gun at my back, and all of the lies. Not so nice, I thought. Who are these people? "So is this the worshipful company of butchers?" I asked. "Society," Leopold corrected. "You mean to tell me that this is how the livery companies of London conduct themselves?" I shouted. "We are not a livery company," the ancient man next to Leopold insisted. "We are a different sort of entity. We conduct butchery only when necessary, and to a specific end," said a young man on the other end of the table on the left side. "We carry on traditions of sacrifice and spill the blood that is needed, but only to keep things in balance. To satisfy the divine commandments," said a woman across from him. "To preserve the sacred order." "One for the Lord and one for Azaz," said Leopold, undoubtedly knowing that this reference would have meaning for me, having read my Baphomet book where it was mentioned. "We watch over the pillars that hold up the sky," said another man, immediately to my right, "and the portals that lead to the other realm. We make sure nobody abuses these things, no matter how powerful they might be on earth. The mighty are always seeking means to even greater power, but some things must be kept inviolate, or else everything will be destroyed." "What does all this mean?" I said to them pleadingly. "And what do you want with me?" Just then, a door on the far end of the wall to my right opened, and in stepped Miles. He switched off the light, and Leopold clicked a button on the object he was holding. The projector came on. A line drawing of the lid of the Mete coffer appeared on the screen in front of us. There was Mete, pulling the sun and moon down with chains. The ancient man next to Leopold spoke again. Do you stand by your interpretation that the image on this coffer represents Mete pulling the gods of heaven down from the sky? Yes, I answered. I am convinced of my hypothesis and have no reason to think otherwise. You've really let the cat out of the bag, the man said contemptuously. Knowledge like this is dangerous. It can give the wrong people the wrong ideas, and that is what you have done. What in the world do you mean? I said. The man on the far end of the table on the left, who had spoken before, replied to me. There is now a very powerful and evil magician who is attempting to challenge the powers of the archons, spurred on by the content of your book, and it has come down to us to put a stop to it. You mean he's trying to make the sky fall down with a child sacrifice ritual? I asked, referring to my theory regarding what I believe was the Templars' most important secret ceremony. So someone's trying to escape the material world, to penetrate the gates of the gods above and overcome them? Yes, said Leopold, the baptism of wisdom, just as you described in your book. Well, I didn't describe it in much detail, I thought. Nobody knows the details. I just figured out what I could from looking at a few pictures. I was really just theorizing, I said, based on what I saw and my research. I'm not even sure if I was right, and I said so in the book. I certainly didn't think anybody in modern times would take the idea seriously. How can you destroy existence by doing a ritual? If anybody ever does figure it out well enough to explain the mechanics of it rationally, by then it will be too late, said the woman to my left, the one who had done my makeup. That's not what we need to know right now, Pamela, said Leopold. He clicked his clicker again, and the picture on the screen changed. What we need to know from you now is what you see here. I looked at the picture. It looked like a map. In fact, it looked quite familiar to me. I had been studying similar pictures for days before coming to London, planning my trip there, listing all the lovely historical monuments I would visit while I was in town for what I thought was legitimate business. But the map in front of me now was upside down. So is this another stupid test of my psychic abilities? I wondered. Like how they forced me to divine my way to the slaughter room they had already set up for me in the tunnels. I felt like I had no choice. I had to play along, to stay on their good side long enough to figure a way out of Stratford House before those weirdos killed me. So I spoke my mind. Well, it's London, of course, I said. The city of London, the old town. But you need to turn it around. Anything else? We can play with a deck of cards. I can probably guess at least 1 out of 10. By Jove! Exclaimed Leopold, leaping to his feet. He walked over to the projector and turned the picture around. She's right. Look, there's St. Paul's. He pointed to a dark circle in the middle, the same feature I had identified as matching up to St. Paul's Cathedral. And there's the Gherkin, he continued, pointing at another spot to the right of it. Remember Miles? He said to his valet. The part that was sticking up like a thumb? So this is a modern map of the city of London, I thought, realizing that the Gherkin was that pickle-shaped skyscraper that dominated the skyline. I knew that the part of town officially known as the City of London, controlled by the Corporation of London, is merely a borough of what is now Greater London. I also knew that it still roughly comprised the same space as the original Roman square mile, known as Londinium, although it was often described incompletely as the, quote, financial district of Greater London. It was really a separate legal entity from the rest of the British Empire. The Queen was traditionally supposed to ask permission from the Lord Mayor of the City of London to enter the square mile to conduct formal business. This is where the centers of corporate power, in counterbalance to regal and ecclesiastic power, were currently based. The Bank of England, the Stock Exchange, and the London Bullion Market Association were there, along with most of the corporate headquarters of Britain-based financial institutions. Even the Temple area, where the Knights Templar had once kept a preceptory, was located in the city and had always been the cornerstone of the British court system. Why are they showing me this map? I thought. And how did they not realize that it was a map? What did Leopold mean about that part that was sticking up? I didn't wonder for long. The man on the left at the opposite end of the table gave me the answer. This is a diagram we made just an hour ago. Of the liver of the bull that we just sacrificed in the basement, which you were a witness to. So I'm here to read entrails, I thought. But I wasn't trained as a haruspex. I know nothing about divining from livers. Yet somehow I knew that this liver looked like the City of London. How on earth is it even possible for the liver of a bull to look like a borough of London? So what are you looking for? I asked. Where's the cancer? Asked Leopold. Tell us where you see the stronghold of the evil magician we described. Did you take any photos of the actual liver? I asked. Yes, Leopold smiled. That was Miles' idea. He took a photo with your phone. Miles was smiling too, proud of himself. He walked over to me, pulled my phone out of his coat pocket and handed it over. As soon as I turned it on, I saw the photo of the bloody liver and almost retched. It was mostly the memory of the kill that caused the reaction. I looked up at Miles again. Thank you, Miles, I said. Can I have my laptop case back also? Oh yes, he replied. It's sitting next to the projector. I looked down at the photo again and tried to clear my mind, looking for the cancer. Whatever it was, the longer I remained useful to them, I figured, the longer I would remain alive. As I stared, I saw a ring of sickly green appear on the liver for a moment, right on the end of a triangle of whitish discoloration. Then the circle vanished, but the white triangle remained. There was a similar triangle of lines formed on the diagram on the projector. I think I see something, I said. Here, between St. Paul's and the Gherkin. I got up and walked over to the projector, then pointed on the diagram to where I had seen the green circle appear on the photograph. It's right on this triangle here. I saw it with my mind's eye. God damn, it's that fucking Jew bugger, said a man on the right side of the table, the one who thinks he's more powerful than the Queen. Don't be so vulgar, said a woman sitting next to him, looking at me nervously. We're not against Jews or homosexuals. We aren't barbarians. I looked away from her. That's exactly what you are, I thought. It doesn't matter. They'll do us all in if we let them, said another man, addressing the entire room. That's why he bribed the city to let him buy the meth room. That's why he built that bulky, impenetrable mass in the center of the city. He wants to do it there, right there, to cut a hole in the sky and bring down the pillars it sits on. Doesn't that make sense now? No, it doesn't make sense, I thought. Did you actually say meth room? I had no idea who they were talking about. I didn't care. While everyone was talking to one another, I took a moment to kneel down and pick up my laptop case. As I was down beneath the table, I punched a few buttons on my phone, grateful that I had input Agent Chesterfield's phone number already while I was sitting in the Egyptian room at the British Museum. I silenced the speakers, but left the mic open. Then I rang his number and put the phone in the outside pocket of my case, which I left open. I returned to my seat at the end of the table. What specifically are you afraid is going to happen? I asked Leopold, locking eyes with him. Pamela, whether you understand or not, rationally, I know you get it intuitively. There really are pillars that hold up the sky. They keep the layers of existence from crashing in on each other. And there are those who are looking for power beyond this world. The man we are telling you about wants to make Atlas shrug for real. No metaphor. We sacrifice bulls to the archons to maintain the cosmic order. But he wants to kill the celestial bull and tear down the columns that uphold creation so that he can climb up out of here and rule the destroyed worlds from above. He believes he can make the gods themselves bow down to him, and in the process we may all be crushed or annihilated. You can't really believe that's possible, I said. We can't take the chance that it might be, the old man next to him answered. Just then, another door opened up, this time on my left side, and a man dressed like a butler came through. What's the meaning of this? The old man shouted. I told you to give us absolute privacy. I'm sorry, sir. It's the police. I had to let them in, the butler replied. Behind him, 2 Metropolitan Police in black uniforms came through, followed by Agent Paris and Agent Chesterfield. Paris pointed directly at Leopold. Then he grabbed the butler by the collar angrily. You told us he wasn't here. I didn't let him in, the butler insisted. He must have sneaked in somehow. He looked around. Well, a lot of you didn't come through the front door. How's that? All right, take him in, said Chesterfield. The police handcuffed Leopold as Chesterfield walked over and took me by the arm. You should take his valet in too, I told him loudly. They both kidnapped me at gunpoint from the British Museum. Then they took me down to some dungeon and killed a bull in front of me. Everyone in the room stopped dead. The room was silent. Everyone stared at me. The WSB members all had looks of complete horror on their faces. "Will you testify to that?" Agent Paris asked me. Miles stared me down cold and shook his head sideways. "No," I answered. I grabbed on tightly to Chesterfield's arm. "Then just take Mr. Weir," Paris told the policeman. "The rest of you, get out of here. Club's closed for the night." They all began to file out. I tried not to look at anyone directly anymore and stared at Chesterfield's shoes. "Let's go," he said to me. I grabbed my laptop case, still looking down, and walked out, letting Chesterfield lead so that he could usher us through the exit line. I could feel Leopold's eyes on my back, and I wanted to get out of his line of sight as soon as possible. Chapter 11. Temple Tavern. Oh, plump-head waiter of the Cock, to which I most resort, how goes the time? "'Tis 5 o'clock. Go fetch a pint of port." Alfred Lloyd Tennyson, The Cock. Chesterfield took me down the stairs and out the front of Stratford House to the sidewalk, at the end of the cul-de-sac called Stratford Place. I didn't see much of the opulent building because I was looking at my shoes the whole time. When we got outside into the early evening air, he suggested we duck into the bookshop in the building next door, covered by an immense glass rooftop garden, thus avoiding the rest of the Society of Butchers as they scurried away. It turned out that this building housed the local Kabbalah Center, and it was their bookshop. We stopped in front of a display of commentaries on the Zohar so that we could speak for a moment. But when we noticed that everyone in the shop was looking at us, we quieted down to a whisper. "So you overheard what was going on when I called you and you traced the call to find me?" I asked. "I was shocked at how quickly you arrived." "Not exactly," he answered. "We had been tracking your movements with your mobile phone since we dropped you off at the museum. Then we lost you for a while. We thought you might be in trouble, so we hovered in the area where we had last tracked you. I actually combed through the Tape nightclub looking for you, and through the Bond Street tube station. Then we picked your signal up again at Stratford Place. We were lurking outside this Kabbalah Center, thinking you were probably here, when I got your call and realized it was coming from the Oriental Club. They took me to an art gallery on Hanover Street," I said. "Then we went through an underground tunnel to a tiny room shaped like a beehive, where they beheaded a bull. Then I passed out and woke up in that room you found me in. Why were you tracking me in the first place?" "Because I didn't feel good leaving you at the museum with that creep Weir still afoot," he answered. And I was right to be cautious. Just then his cell phone rang, and he answered it. I could hear the other side of the conversation bleeding through. It was Agent Paris. He was suggesting that they take me into the office, at Thames House presumably, for questioning, and let Weir sit in a cell all night, waiting for interrogation tomorrow. "Oh no," he said. "Let me take her out for a drink, and I'll talk to her there. She's had a rough day. I'm sure she could use a bite and a quaff." He winked at me. "You old dog," I heard Paris say. "Just make sure you get some real intelligence from her this time before you let her go." "Oh, don't worry," said Chesterfield. "I won't let her get off easy this time." He chuckled. I didn't. He looked away from me. "I'll show up tomorrow morning with a full report," he promised his partner. "So do I have any choice about going out for a drink?" I asked. "Not unless you'd rather be questioned at an MI5 office building," he replied. "So, just let me know. Where would you like to be interrogated, my dear?" "Do you know any pubs in the Temple District?" I asked. "I'd like to see that old Knights Templar church again," I said. "I know just the place," he replied. Paris had the company car with him, so we walked out to Oxford Street and across to Bond Street Station, where we took a 10-minute ride on the Central Line to Chancery Lane Station. There, we exited on Holborn, went west to Chancery Lane itself, then followed that road south down to Fleet Street, where our destination was. On the way, he pointed out the famous Silver Vaults and the former address of Aleister Crowley's London residence, although the actual building he'd lived in was demolished in 2006. This was his way of flirting, as it was when he told me he had thought I was cute before, wearing the stinky old jeans and a sweater with no makeup. "But now you look positively radiant," he added. "Thanks," I replied. "I guess I clean up well, at least when I have a personal stylist and I'm lying unconscious." "You mean they changed your clothes while you were passed out?" he said. He looked horrified. "I don't think they violated me," I said. "At least no more than what I've already told you about." We arrived at Ye Olde Cock Tavern, a pub which had been around since 1549. Samuel Pepys, Charles Dickens, and Alfred Lloyd Tennyson all drank there. After we'd eaten and drunk our fill, Chesterfield said, we could take the back door out the pub and through the enclosed courtyard to see Temple Church just before it closed for the evening. We ordered beer and beef burgers, as they call them. Then we stuffed ourselves while I spilled my guts to him about everything that had happened since my adventure began. I told him all about the Mété coffer and Leopold, the alleged lecture I'd been hired to give, the flight delay, Leopold dropping out of contact, and being questioned by him and Paris at Parliament, where I found out the truth about Leopold's identity from him and Agent Paris. Then I recounted my experience at the museum, where I learned that the coffer was gone, ran into Leopold for reasons unknown, and was chased outside by people I thought worked for accounts receivable. Finally, I described the kidnapping, the blindfolded march through the subterranean passage, the bull sacrifice, and the forced divination from the bull liver at Oriental Club. I even mentioned, in passing, their claim that they needed help locating an evil magician who intended to destroy existence as we knew it with a ritual to topple the pillars of heaven. "Chicken Littles," said Chesterfield, amused. "The sky's falling. What a bunch of nutters." He couldn't believe it was that the real butcher's livery company was involved, especially considering that Leopold had lied about his name, his so-called barony, and his phony seat in the House of Lords. So Agent Chesterfield got out his smartphone to investigate. "What did you say it was called again?" he asked. "The Worship Society of Butchers, or the Worshipful Company? Because Worshipful Company of Butchers is the name of the actual livery company." I dug through the email archives on my own phone. Leopold called it Society. He said it several times. I pondered for a moment. They did actually tell me specifically that they weren't a livery company, but a different sort of entity. So I guess I was looking at the Worshipful Company's website all along, thinking it was for Leopold's group, but it looks like the Butchers' Society is just as fake as his supposed peerage. "Which would explain why they meet at Oriental Club instead of Butcher's Hall," he said. "Because anyone who can meet the dress code and afford the fees can book time there, even if they don't belong to the actual Oriental Club, which you say Weir never specifically told you he was a member of." "But the butler acted like he hadn't let them through the front door," I said. "So maybe they sneaked in through an underground tunnel. Maybe there's a member of the club who knows a secret way in and let them through. Something that connects with the tunnels I was inside of. And there must be a much wider entrance to the tunnel somewhere, or else how did they get the bull down there in the first place?" Chesterfield asked me to bring out my laptop so that he could look at a larger image than his phone screen. After just a few seconds, he let out an aha and swiveled the screen around to show me something. "Is this the room where they beheaded the bull?" he asked. He showed me a report on a building survey from the city of Westminster from 2014. It was commissioned to make sure the new expansions of the Bond Street tube station at nearby Hanover Square didn't interfere with the Stratford House basement. This basement did, as the report showed, jut out significantly from the front of the building, so that it was essentially underneath the middle of Stratford Place, the street out front. Like the rest of the building, the basement dated back to 1774. A photograph included in the report showed that beehive ceiling, which I'll never forget. So if there is another intersecting tunnel that leads to 10 Hanover and all the other places you went, it must have been built without city permission sometime after 2014, said Chesterfield. And somehow the people building the tube tunnels never ran into it either, unless one of them is in on it, which is possible. "Really?" I said. "You think there are people building new secret tunnels underneath London even today?" "Oh, we know there are," he answered, hushing his tone again. "Look, the new boom in both residential and commercial real estate in London is underground. The wealthy are building basements 3 and 4 levels down because square footage is so valuable here. Hundreds of applications are being approved every year. There have got to be some that get built without permission." Chesterfield rolled his eyes up, sucked in his lips like he was debating whether or not he should tell me something. Then he continued. "We at MI5 have found several. We've busted some, we're watching others. We think there are hundreds more that we haven't found yet. That is something I should not have told you, but maybe now you can trust me with something you wouldn't have otherwise told me." He looked at me deeply, expectantly. "I've actually told you everything I know. I replied. Everything I can think of that you might be interested in. Well, let's go do something you're interested in, he said, standing up. Let's go look at those dead Templars across the courtyard over there. We went down the stairs from where we had been sitting and out the pub's back door. Then we walked through the enclosed courtyard, past the tomb of the Irish writer Oliver Goldsmith, which, we were warned by the bartender, was haunted, and through the back door of the medieval temple church, built by and for the Knights Templar. I hadn't been there on my first visit to London. This was my first time seeing it, but I had seen many pictures of the old tombs of the Templars recessed in the floor there. Each tomb was decorated with a life-sized relief on top, depicting the deceased in full armor, usually with a dog at his feet. I didn't have any revelations until Chesterfield spoke up. It's funny how their legs are all crossed, isn't it? He said. I looked at the Templar effigies. Indeed, the crossed legs were very peculiar. And they all look like they're in pain, almost like somebody just kicked them in the balls or chopped their dicks off with a sword. Ha! He spoke too loudly. The two people who were sitting there in the pews quietly praying looked up. Sorry, he said nervously, but it got me thinking. You know, the Roman cult of the goddess Cybele had a fully castrated priesthood. They called them the Galli. They would become possessed by the goddess during their festivals. Then they would go crazy and cut off their own genitals in a frenzy, in honor of Attis, Cybele's consort, who had done the same thing. And Attis was often depicted with his legs crossed, just like these Templars. So the priests castrated themselves to be like him, because they thought that's what their goddess wanted, Chesterfield said. Yep, I replied. That was how they were initiated. A couple of days later, they would put the severed sex organs in a sacred coffer and parade them around in a celebratory procession. They actually had all these festivals in late March, around the spring equinox, right about now. The castration rite was called the Day of Blood. That was on March 24th. Really? Said Chesterfield. He was going pale. Nobody ever points out that this... Yeah, I said. Nobody ever points out that this was the day that men in the Heaven's Gate cult castrated themselves before they committed suicide. They believed that they were going to be taken up into a portal that they thought was riding past Earth with the Hale-Bopp comet that night. They thought they needed to be castrated to get in. They wanted to be the eunuchs of heaven that the Bible talks about. Some people think that comet was actually Nibiru, also called Planet X, which the Babylonians identified with the time of the spring equinox. My little joke brought all that to mind, did it? Said Chesterfield in a very unjoking manner. Well, I was thinking about the Mette coffer. The British Museum labeled the picture on the lid as being Cybele, and Hammer Purgstall said that it looked like her, except she's got a beard, and she was labeled Mette. He was sure that she was the same figure as the Baphomet, demon that the Templars supposedly worshipped in their secret ceremonies. Chesterfield nodded. I continued. He also said that the Templars were covertly practicing Ophite Gnosticism, and the Ophites were said to have incorporated the Cybelic cult into their syncretistic system. Now here we have the Templar Knights, depicted on their tombstones with their legs crossed as though they've been injured in the genital region. It's just like the Fisher King and the Grail stories, which the Templars were associated with. It's all starting to add up. Look! I typed a few words into my phone and brought up Eliphas Levi's depiction of the Templar demon Baphomet. Look, I said again, this is Baphomet. This is the way the occultist Eliphas Levi depicted him. I'm just now realizing why he showed the demon with a caduceus coming out of his crotch instead of a penis, even though he said it was a hermaphrodite, because it was actually a castrated hermaphrodite, just like Catullus said Cybele was originally. I guess I didn't care if Chesterfield was able to follow my logic. I was mainly saying it out loud for my own benefit, to aid my thoughts. By this time, the two people trying to pray peacefully in this house of God had gotten up and left in disgust. Chesterfield looked at me directly with a pained expression and stood silently for a moment. At last he spoke. Pamela, I think there is something that you need to see. Let's go back to the tavern so we can use your laptop there. You'll need a drink after you see it. Chapter 12. Easter Sunday, April Fool. April is the cruelest month. T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. We walked back into the pub and up the stairs to the third floor. We picked a table next to a window that gave us a view of the former location of the Bank of England, now moved to Threadneedle Street near Walbrook. This same building on the western side of the corner of Chancery Lane and Fleet Street had been, before that, home to the very pub we were standing in at one point. However, the original pub burned down in a fire, as we learned from an informative plaque mounted on the wall near our table. I plugged my computer in and started it up while Chesterfield went and got us a couple of double-shot whiskeys with beer chasers. Then we both sat with our backs to the window and the computer screen on the table in front of us. That way, we figured, we could make sure nobody walked in on us and saw what was on the computer screen. We both downed about half of our whiskeys. Then Chesterfield took a small black thumb drive out of his pocket and held it up in front of me. This file was sent to MI5 through our anonymous tip page. It was encrypted into a video of a cat playing with a ball of yarn and wrapped with a malignant virus which we were able to neutralize. Then we decrypted the video, which I'm about to show you. Don't tell anyone I showed you or I will lose my job and go to prison. I nodded. He plugged the drive into my computer. Play it from the drive. Don't copy it, he insisted. Obviously, I thought to myself. I opened the drive, and then the file, which was named easter.sunday.april.fools.mov. Chesterfield grabbed my hand and clasped tightly as he looked at the screen in absolute dread. The video, or rather, the video of the film, for it was, it appeared to me, shot on 35mm black and white celluloid, started with a sequence of 3 old-fashioned title pages of the type once used for dialogue on silent films. They said, "In an effort to birth a grand new cultus, the synthesis of all persecuted beliefs, the Grand Chaplain of the Temple Militia remarried our father to the Great Mother. Together they engendered a child destined to upset the order of the eons. The Son became the Son became our father. Then he married the Great Mother again." The next scenes are hard to describe because they are so awful. I shall do so matter-of-factly because that's all I can do. First, we saw a group of boys, ages spanning from 10 to 12. They were all wearing suits and ties and smoking cigarettes on some steps outside. The shot widened to show the now familiar statue of Anteros at Piccadilly Circus, with the sign for the Aero Cinema visible in the background. Then there was another title page. Enticed by the promised revelation of love's mysteries, the Easter fool stumbles down the rabbit hole into the lair of counter-love. In the next shot, framed up on the boys again, an adult white male hand emerged from screen left, holding a copy of Playboy magazine. The cover featured the back of the head of a white rabbit who was watching a woman in a blue dress smiling in front of a film camera. When the kids saw the magazine, their faces lit up as they grabbed at it excitedly. The one on the left got his hands on it first. Then the adult hand holding it started moving over to the right, with the child following along. At that point, the film abruptly cut to the next title page, which said, "The fish has been caught and is dragged down to Hades." This cut to a shot of a bust of the Roman god Serapis, aka Hades, Dispater or Pluto, with his traditional modius, a grain measuring basket, on top of his head. This was set against a dark background. Next, there was a wider shot of the head, showing that it was sitting on top of a crumbling column. This was followed by a shot with an even broader frame, revealing that the column was part of the decayed foundation of an ancient rectangular building now in ruins. There were never more than 2 or 3 stones stacked up in any one place, so no part of it was more than 3 feet high. But it looked like it was set up inside of larger, more modern windowless room, with a metal-plated light switch visible on the wall. Beneath the dilapidated stones one could see, in places, a tiled checkerboard floor. Laying down on his back across a row of these ancient blocks was the same boy lured by the magazine in the previous scene. He was now naked, blindfolded, and screaming hysterically. 2 figures in hooded black robes with black bird masks were holding him by the hands and feet as he flailed. The camera then zoomed in to focus just on them. Next, a figure in a leather veil and apron, just like the 2 men I had seen in the basement of Stratford House, stepped into the scene. Meanwhile, a third figure, again wearing a black bird mask, held a stone bowl beneath the boy's crotch and used a white-gloved hand to hold the genitals up about a finger's width. The butcher then brandished a pair of cleavers. The camera zoomed into the child's sex organs, which were snipped off. Huge amounts of blood, as well as the parts themselves, were collected in the bowl before the camera finally cut away from the gaping wound and thrashing limbs to a black screen. At this point, Chesterfield paused the video as I ran to the bathroom to vomit. I retched and retched until nothing but bile was coming up. Thankfully, nobody else was using the other stalls, and the facilities were quite tidy. There's nothing worse than puking in a dirty public toilet. Once again, I thanked the Lord for small favors. Something about being on my knees in front of the throne made me want to pray. I noticed that I had a tendency to do this, and this only, as my expression of religion. Why didn't I thank God when I survived the kidnapping and the bull sacrifice? I wondered. And why didn't I pray for my own safety throughout the entire event, or before? Why don't I pray for God to get me out of this mess right now? And there it was. I stood there in front of the bathroom mirror, wondering why I wasn't taking a particular course of action. It hardly even amounts to action in the physical sense, I thought, unless you actually choose to kneel down while praying, or to speak your prayer out loud, which most people don't even do these days. Not only that, I thought, a real religious person would have prayed for others too. Prayed for the boy in the film, and others who were victimized like him. Prayed that the perpetrators be brought to justice. Maybe they would even pray that the guilty ones come to realize their evil and ask for forgiveness before it was too late. But I just stood there staring at myself, trying to use my thumb to wipe away the eyeliner that had smeared due to the perspiration that came with vomiting. If you think about it, though, I could have been more cowardly. Not once did I think about running away from this entire sordid affair. I was under no obligation to continue my involvement. I could have gone straight to the airport and insisted they move up my departure date, since I still had the tickets for the flight home. Instead, I returned to the table and sat back down next to Agent Chesterfield. I asked him if there was more on the video. "Sadly, yes," he answered. I asked him if I really needed to see it. He said it might be helpful. So I agreed. I took a few more minutes to finish my whiskey and beer. Then we continued. The next scene showed the bowl with the gore in it being placed by gloved hands with robed arms upon an altar that was shown sitting among the same ruins. There were two other bowls that were similar, but empty, sitting on top of the altar as well. The next shot showed the sides of the altar. One featured a tree from which hung two flutes and a tympanum. The ceremonial hand drum used in the rites of Cybele was hung, along with two pipes. The relief on the other side of the altar showed two of her galley priests wearing their traditional Phrygian hats. They were carrying a coffer on poles mounted on their shoulders, just like the Ark of the Covenant was depicted as being carried. On top of the box was the Hetoimasiac throne of the goddess, depicted in an iconic form with a cista, a ritual basket, placed as a stand-in for the invisible goddess. I instantly recognized this as a genuine altar of Cybele that once belonged to a wealthy gentleman in London at the turn of the 20th century, whereabouts now unknown. I had read about it recently in the JSTOR archives while doing research for an article one had published in an anthropology journal. I knew there was another side to it, not shown in the film, which depicted the goddess standing with a bowl in her hand while two galleys stood at either side of her. Both were shown crossing their legs uncomfortably, just like the Templar effigies on the graves at Temple Church. Next, the film showed the gloved hands straining the organs out of the blood in the bowl with a slotted ladle. They were then placed in two other bowls, the penis in one, the testicles in the other. The hands then lifted each bowl, one at a time, while another pair of gloved hands appeared from off-screen and placed a small, form-fitting basket beneath each one. Following this, the baskets, with the bowls still inside, were covered with a wicker lid, so that each one now resembled the basketed cista that were depicted on top of the throne, shown in relief on the side of the altar. After that, the second set of hands gave the first pair an ancient-looking cylindrical metal casket, about 4 inches tall and 2 inches in circumference. It was decorated with dilapidated scenes of men fighting with various wild animals. It was carried by a metal chain that it hung from. The first pair of hands took off the top of the casket, which remained hanging from the chain. They then removed a small ball made of metal wire, dripping wet, which hung on a chain of its own and contained a dark substance. I figured it was a strainer containing herbs of some sort. The hands poured liquid that looked like murky water from the casket into the bowl with the blood, while the second set of hands held the basket lid up. Then, a more modern-looking metal bucket with a handle was given to the first pair of hands by the second pair. It contained a clear, thick, slimy substance that appeared to be fat, which was poured into the bowl with the blood. Then a large metal spoon came into the shot from screen right and was used to stir the contents of the bowl. Following this, The film cut to another shot. The camera was pointing down at the bowl in the basket, with the lid off and the spoon still in it, which now appeared to be sitting on one of the ruined walls. Then, 3 erect and circumcised adult white penises appeared from off-screen. 3 large white male hands, ungloved, were seen masturbating them. After almost a minute, all 3 penises had ejaculated into the bowl, one right after the other, with only a few seconds in between each climax. The penises then left the screen. Gloved hands appeared again to stir the mixture with the spoon and place the basket lid back on. The subsequent shot showed what was unmistakably the Mete coffer, sitting there on the antique stone bricks stacked next to the altar. The lid with the picture of Mete was removed by one set of gloved hands, and the 3 baskets were placed inside by another pair. The lid of the coffer was carefully replaced. Then came a title page which read, "We process in the patterns of the Sunrunner." In the next shot, 4 figures in dark robes with hoods and black bird masks were seen circumambulating an old building, with a gurney mounted on their backs and the coffer riding on top. In front of them was another hooded figure, shorter than the others, with a white veil draped over his or her face and held on by an attached headband. This person was holding a small metal aspergillum and was using it to spray lustrations onto the building as they walked around it. Then we were given a wide shot, and we could see the building they were walking around, topped with a large dome. I thought it was most likely St. Paul's Cathedral there in London. They walked around it 7 times. Then the scene changed, and we saw them walking along a street in London, next to a building with a tiny metal grate embedded in its corner. The camera focused on the grate as the people with the coffer walked past. The short-veiled person stayed behind and shook the aspergillum at the grate, behind which we could see a small, roughly hewn, somewhat square white stone, about half a foot wide and a few inches tall. Then the shot changed to show the group marching along the Thames. They were walking next to a building positioned right on the shore of the river, with 2 wooden ramps leading out of a large opening on the side, facing the water. This led down to a couple of small boats that were docked right next to it. The shot was head-on as the entourage walked forward. This cut quickly to a shot inside one of the boats. The coffer could be seen sitting in the foreground without the gurney or its holders. It was sitting on top of one end of a mid-tone colored blanket folded in half. A gloved hand on a robed arm folded the other end of the blanket over the coffer. Next, the camera raised up. All we could see above the sides of the boat was sky, but we could tell when the boat started moving from the change in the clouds. Then we saw it turn left and go underneath something. Suddenly, everything went dark. Then there was another title page. It said, "Sacrifice to the Guardians of the Tower." In the next shot, a metal cage with several black crow-like birds was shown. Another gloved hand reached for the lock and opened the cage. Then one of the basketed sister was shown sitting on grass in front of a park bench. The shot widened and we saw the birds standing in the surrounding grass, pecking at the inside of the basket. Then it was opened, and the contents, bloody bits of flesh, presumably the sacrificed testicles, were emptied out onto the grass. All of the birds immediately converged upon them and began eating them. As the birds walked away with the meat in their beaks, a gloved hand came on screen holding a shovel with a handle about 3 feet long. It was pushed into the dirt beneath the grass. Then the shot widened to show a man, judging by the shoes, in a black robe with a sun face mask pressing down the shovel with his foot to insert it deeper. Next we were shown a stone effigy of a tomb with the stone rolled out, standing empty. We could tell it was an effigy when the camera panned up quickly to show a cross mounted above. There was a dove winging its way down to the bottom of the cross and 2 angels kneeling in prayer on either side of it. Then the camera panned down and showed a close-up of the tombstone. On it were etched the words, "Why seek ye the living among the dead?" Then the thumb of a wrinkled white male hand came forward from behind the camera and covered up the word, "Why?" In the following shot, a young, barely pubescent girl wearing an Easter dress and bonnet was shown holding hands with a finely dressed man and woman whose faces were not shown. The first shot showed mostly just her, and the second we saw the group from behind. They appeared to be at a church, as pews and a statue of the Virgin could be seen in the background of the second shot. The girl looked very sad. Quite inappropriately, she seemed to be wearing makeup on her face. She had eyeliner, eyeshadow, and lipstick on. Her face was made pale with cake foundation. After this shot, another title page was shown, which said, Sacred Marriage of the Stone and the Bossy. The next image was filmed looking through the front windshield of a car driving through a gateway underneath a medieval-looking archway. It was very tall, with one large arch in the middle, through which the car drove. Then there were two more narrow openings on either side, only wide enough for foot traffic or perhaps a bicycle. There was a structure on top almost as tall as the arch itself. It featured two statues, each set inside of a niche, and between them a stained glass window. Extending outward on either side were tall hedges, and behind these an even taller black metal fence. The two smaller archways were barred by metal gates of the same style, but the gate for the large one in the middle was set open. It was raining, and the wipers were on as the car went under the arch. Beyond was a driveway lined with trees. We saw the car go down the driveway to a very large red-bricked manor house. This cut to the interior of a decayed, medieval-looking stone room with a small, round window showing only darkness beyond. Two hooded people, this time wearing lion masks, stood on either side of the window holding torches, which appeared to be providing the light. The camera pointed down. There, the same girl from the scene before was now shown standing in a white robe, shivering and crying. Eyeliner streamed down her face, while two people with robes and bird masks held her by the arms. Another man then stepped into the picture, also wearing a dark robe, but with a sun mask. He was holding a staff that ended in the shape of a small, erect phallus. The staff was dark, but the phallus was light-colored. The girl was forced by the people in the bird masks to bend down on one knee before the man in the sun mask, and to hold her hands in front of her in an attitude of prayer. The people in the bird masks demonstrated to her how she was to hold her hands. Then afterwards she sat there pleading and sobbing for a few seconds. Another title page came up. See the Virgin Genuflect to our Father. We then were shown a close-up of the girl's face, as the sun man put the phallus wand directly up to her lips. She turned away in disgust. I noticed that it looked almost as though it were covered with actual human skin, and I wondered if it was. Next, we saw the phallus wand's tip submerged into one of the basketed cista, shown sitting on the floor. The wand was used to stir the mixture of blood, fat, and herbs, which now looked quite congealed. The natural lubricant caused the dildo to glisten in the torchlight. Following that, there was a shot from the side of the girl lying on her stomach on a blanket on the ground, with the top of her head butted up against a roughly hewn, vaguely square-shaped stone. The poor girl screamed and balled her hands up into tight fists as the man in the sun mask knelt behind her. He inserted the wand into her rectum, much to her extreme agony, pushing and pulling it several times. Her pain then seemed to increase immensely when he mounted her and replaced the wand with his own swollen member. As she screamed, we saw the girl's head repeatedly bang up against the stone, which, I noticed, resembled the one seen earlier in the film sitting behind a grate in the corner of a building. Then came another title page. The sacred womb is seated with the ancient rite. Afterwards, an Easter egg is laid upon the chamber floor. The last shot was horrifying and disgusting beyond measure. While I regret to have to disturb you further, dear reader, these things must be said. What we saw was a tight shot of a string of beads covered in dark slime, being pulled by an off-screen gloved hand from a swollen, prolapsed, and distended anus. The beads were white and carved from either stone, ivory, or some form of bone. Between each set of 10 round beads, yes, I counted, there was a bead carved into the shape of either a hand or a foot, for a total of 4. At the end of the string there was one made to look like a Janus head, with the face of Jesus on one side and the face of a skull on the other. After this came out, a large black mass, which I presumed to be bloody stool, began to emerge amid profuse bleeding. But before it took any discernible shape, the film mercifully ended. When the final awful shot at last faded to black, I was in shock. I was also flushed and sweating heavily as another wave of nausea overtook me. I went to the bathroom to empty my stomach again,